All right. Well, welcome back, revelers. I see that some of you guys stuck around from the last interview. So we're getting ready to do our next interview, and this one's going to be for the U.S. House of Representatives, Texas's 2nd Congressional District. This would be a seat that is currently occupied by one Daniel Crenshaw. The guy's a veteran, but not exactly the biggest fan. So we're going to be talking to Peter, who would like to take his seat away. This one may seem strange to some people because being a libertarian, they would think that I would be more in line with Dan Crenshaw. But as a libertarian, I believe in a lot more of the social policies of Democrats and disagree more on the fiscal side. So we're going to go ahead and talk to him. We're going to let him introduce himself here. So, Peter, welcome. Are you able to hear me okay?
Thanks, guys. I can hear you, actually. Outstanding.
Okay.
It's Rob, right?
Yeah, it's Rob. So thank you again for joining us here on... Yep, I'm Rob. So thanks for joining us. And hey, he even put in there is the full race. He's for the House District number 2, as I was saying, running against Dan Crenshaw, who of course did not respond to my request for interview, but hey, it is what it is. So initially, go ahead and introduce yourself and why you're running for the seat.
Outstanding, Rob. Yeah, and of course, I really appreciate the opportunity. This is an exceptional platform for me to reach out, and I did hear from your promo coming in that you're a libertarian, and I love that. That's really like thinking about the Bill of Rights and all of our constitutional freedoms that we have, and like I hold near and dear. As much as I'm the Democratic nominee, the U.S. House Texas District 2, I'm also have quite a bit of conservative values, which I hope to be able to speak about a little bit here. But so why I decided to be the Democratic Party, to run with the Democratic Party, folks, and Rob, is so pretty much that's where my majority of my values align. In my background, I'm from New York, so the suburbs of New York City, and I grew up just with a love of the environment and very passionate and enthusiastic, like in the sales. My dad was a textile converter in sales, a Navy lieutenant from the Navy and a naval instructor. So part of my ethics, my integrity, just my honesty, and just my genuine fun-loving Mr. Filler is partly from my dad, Wallace Filler. So he just instilled those core values in me. Just be ethical, and people will just appreciate you for who you are. So why I decided to run, I just felt Dan Crenshaw is vulnerable. Like I'm a talker. I like to listen to talk stations and watch the news, and I just kept hearing like a repetitive narrative that was Republican stronghold slip into Democratic control after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, and of course the insurrection at the Capitol, Rob. So I just started like reading the tea leaves, so to speak, and seeing the thing, and then I recalled that Dan Crenshaw was my representative and how unpopular and how unliked he is. So I thought it's a perfect chance for me to at least make a run at it, see what I could do, and like to me it's a win-win. I'm getting a lot of interviews and a chance to speak about my personal views, which I'm sure you'll ask me a lot of outstanding questions, and just a chance to give Dan Crenshaw a run for his money, because I don't think that he's really been challenged in a way to really challenging his stances, behaviors, and that's what and I'm sure I'll never have a debate like this with him, because like you said, he doesn't respond. But I'm sure he's probably hearing my messages, and if anything, getting him to pivot a little bit, like just the way he is. So I hope that answered your first question pretty good there, Rob. And again, thank you for the opportunity to be with you here on the program. It's an honor. So thank you.
And when I make the clips, I'm going to make sure to tag Dan Crenshaw in them. So maybe that'll also help him come and answer for some things. But yeah, I don't like him, so I don't know if he'll come on. So let's see here. So you actually already brought up one of the biggest ones, but I'm going to try and go and kind of the order of what people are saying is important to them.
Okay.
Oh, looks like Peter jumped. Oh, I bet he's on the Eastern time zone. Okay, so that's interesting.
Me? I'm on this.
So
it's Central Time here, so we're at 6:27.
Yeah, I'm guessing. So the next interview I had scheduled was for Peter Sonski, who is the Solidarity Party candidate. So he just popped in. He's the one that just popped in.
Nice. Well, it's 7:30 Eastern, so we're double booked here.
Yeah. So when I sent the invite, I thought I mentioned Central Time, but let's see. Anyway, so to start out, we'll go ahead and start with the biggest one. It's the economy. How would you attack the economy? That's because, well, I do when I ask this question, I actually kind of preface it with one little point. We're showing some GDP growth around 2%, but our inflation rate on certain things are higher, like 20%. And the easiest example is cars. If you sell $100 million worth of cars for $20,000, that's 5,000 cars. But if the inflation's 20%, the cars now cost $24,000, and that's only 4,100 cars, and you get the same amount. So, but you're selling, financing 1,000 less cars almost. So,
right.
While our numbers say we're up 2%, when you take into account the full scale of inflation, we're actually receding as far as what's being produced, what's being sold, and what's being financed in the country.
Wow. Well, it's a tough question. It's a conundrum. Yeah. So what's the right answer, right? What's my stance on the economy? All right. Well, again, thanks for the outstanding question. So it's a lot to unpack there. So we can start with some of the facts that you just gave me here about the economy.
I think you froze there.
I would like to work on the budget committee, like balancing our budget. And then, I'm sorry. What I do know, Rob, is
you're in and out, but we'll just push through.
I know. Let's just say here. So, what I would like to say is, what I do know is, what has been talking about is how they're planning to battle corporate greed and price gouging. So as far as I could tell, like Kroger is a supermarket here, and they just let out some news that they're doing as you know, it's been 4 years now. We're just recovering from the pandemic, and a lot of what we're seeing, is related to that in the first, I guess, year or two. That would make sense, like cause and effect. That we had a pandemic, everything was shut down. So when things came back online, the prices they were just going up, and even Joe Biden made a joke about shrinkflation. So what would I do, Peter Phil, the voice of reason? Call myself the voice of reason because I'm a reasonable Democrat. I just like to think about like solutions. So I would do the same as her. Try to focus on control our controllables. If it's corporate gouging, corporate welfare, whatever it is, like let's knock that out. I would, if you want to talk about economy, since I'm a resource management major, well, that was forestry. We're in the greatest country, like as far as geographically, we have all this great, outstanding land. A lot of it's public, a lot of it's private. But I would do forestry, like grow chestnut, all those like the good lumber, like the lumber trees, wild cherry, all the good trees that like we can get lumber. So we could potentially, this is one potential that hasn't been talked about. Of course, cannabis and marijuana, that would be right there a great source of revenue to help stimulate our economy. Because Robert, I don't know what your thought is. My thought is we're the divided states of America when it comes to marijuana and cannabis. Like, so Texas is like we have 3.3% CBD and THC. So there is some revenue being generated from that, like THC, like light or whatever. But if there a real marijuana market and cannabis across the entire country that we could regulate and tax, that could be a place where we can help to grow our economy. So thanks for the question. As a representative, I would do my best to help the little economy here by with appropriations, because appropriations come back to our district, and there are different ways that we can help to do projects to stimulate our economy, and to like little seed money for little projects that'll help the people who need the most help, and potentially help people to start local businesses here in Houston, Texas. So Congressional District 2 is North Houston, and just a little bit of South Montgomery, which is a town called the Woodlands. So it's quite conservative, but I feel I'll do well.
Oh, I'm up here in Crockett, Texas, so I know exactly where you're at.
Outstanding. So
I'm in Crockett, so I'm up here by Huntsville.
Oh, Huntsville. Yeah, I have a little property.
I know that's outside your district, but yeah, I lived in Spring for a long time, and then I built a little tiny house in Livingston, and now I'm living out here by Crockett. So okay, so on this one, and I'm not going to beat you up about this one, but I'm gonna tell you, you picked a fun example for me, because my bachelor's was in accounting, and I worked in corporate management for large retail corporations, including Kroger. Okay.
Right on.
So on the actual groceries and stuff, that inflation has nothing to do with the company selling them. Groceries, they average 1% profit on groceries. Okay. Textiles like clothing and apparel, stuff like that, their gross margins are usually a little bit higher, but by the time you like calculate all the wages, transportation, housing, everything runs at about 1%. So if you go and look at the company's financial statements and look at where their revenues are, their actual ROI is ridiculously small, and they kind of juice by investing in other things to add in additional revenue, or by renting out space in the shopping centers that they own to other stores, stuff like that. Okay. So, but the actual revenue, it's not on price gouging. Now, what you do see in retail is you see zone pricing. So, like if I have a chain of stores, and in one stores nothing's getting stolen, then I can keep that price as low as possible. But then if I have a store, say, over outside of the University of Houston area, and I think you know the area that I'm talking about there in Houston, I'm going to have high shrink, which is inventory that disappears for whatever reason. Okay. So if I've got high shrink, then I need to get more money out of those items in order to turn even a 1% profit. And I think if you try and say that a company can't make 1% on, 1 cent on every dollar that they spend, that's kind of crazy. You know what I mean? So, they are going to have to, in order to keep those stores open, then they're going to have to raise the prices for those stores, or spread it out and make the people in other places that aren't stealing stuff pay more. So there's more zone pricing. So if the community shopping at the store is stealing from the store, that community is going to end up paying the difference, but it still comes down to working out to be about a 1% margin. Okay. So on the inflation, I've got to push back on you right there, because our money supply has increased by 40%, And on some items, our inflation is as high as 40%. They really pick and choose what they put in the official rate of 9%, but it's actually more like 20, 30, 40%, depending on the items. A lot of the stuff that you go to Home Depot and buy, it's up 100%. Like the wood materials, raw materials, stuff like that. A lot of that's up even more than that. And why is it up? Because a bunch of lumber yards ended up shutting down during the pandemic, and it costs millions of dollars to get them open again. So there's a lot of things contributing on it. And I'd say the biggest one, the first one right off the bat, would be the pricing in of the money supply. So now that's the Federal Reserve.
Well,
so
it's. I was gonna say so you have the economy background. If you were the representative, trying to flip that question. So what would you do to help with the economy?
Well, first and foremost, I would think that the Congress needs to start limiting the power of the Fed, their ability to print money. They also need to run a budget like a business, and not saying that they should make a profit, but we currently have $1 trillion in obligations every year for servicing our debt. Okay? We have, it just crossed over $1 trillion, so we need to set like $1.2 trillion aside for paying on our debt and paying it down. Okay? Which leaves $3 trillion that the government can spend. That's your budget to spend, and you can't go over it, and you can't do additional appropriations after. Okay, and you can't separate all these things into different packages, because they put these budgets that are like 6.5 trillion, and then the government, by the time you get to the end of the year, they actually spent like 8 trillion. You get what I'm saying? Well, where's all that money coming from? They're printing it, which is increasing the money supply. But the number of goods coming out, and I gave you the demonstration, it shows, okay, so the GDP, that means the gross sales are up by 2%, but when the prices are up, that means we're 20%, we're selling 18% less product. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So part of the issue is money supply, and part of the issue is the federal budget, because they refuse to follow the revenues that they have coming in. Like, we don't have any major wars going on. We don't have any of this going on, so we don't need to support extended foreign operations. There's a lot of countries that we give foreign aid to that are not our allies. So there's a lot of place we can trim fat. And then we can also point to there's 12 cabinet departments, and yet we have 5,000 government agencies. And who's supposed to oversee the government agencies when we've got 500 members of Congress and 5,000 agencies? The oversight's not happening. So I think a big fat bloated federal government is a big part of the problem. So the first thing would be paring back spending and actually spending down some of that debt, and then mandating that the Federal Reserve reduce the money supply, because that's going to cause deflation. It would need to be very measured, so you don't end up in a deflationary spiral. But printing more money and spending more money is going to do the opposite. And trying to blame the companies. Walmart, for example, would be one of the companies she's accusing of price gouging. So what are you going to do? Put them out of business and 2 million people lose their jobs?
That would certainly be counterproductive. That would not be the end goal, but maybe just to bring it to the news, and then hopefully they'll self-regulate. Like, that's what I'm noticing. A lot of this, shame. I don't know for sure, but every
single state
strategy, these calls.
Yeah, every single state has the ability to regulate their local markets, and they already all have laws against price gouging. So what that is Kamala Harris talking about price gouging is making an excuse for inflation that runaway spending caused, because she was the tie-breaking vote on all that spending. So if she doesn't blame it on somebody else, she's got to take responsibility for her part in it.
100%.
And that's my perspective.
What? And that was one of
I
the
said, I
pieces of
said
the
that,
puzzle.
and that's my perspective coming with the macroeconomic and the microeconomic viewpoint of it, because I've seen all the way down from the ground level, small businesses, huge corporations. I worked in the largest retailer in the grocery segment, the largest retailer in the world, then the new largest retailer in the world, then the new largest retailer in the world. 3 different companies, and they kept overtaking each other. After I went to the new one, we became the new largest retailer in the world. I worked for the largest home improvement retailer in the world, the largest small box chain in the world by a number of locations outside of 7-Eleven, but most of those are licensed shops, not actually 7-Eleven stores. So I've got a lot of experience dealing with all different sizes of business, and businesses are barely running. And if you really break down, so they sit there and say, oh, this company like made $500 billion. Yeah, they made $500 billion on 50 trillion transactions. You know what I mean? So they made a penny here, a penny there, a penny there, a penny there. It ends up being a big pile, but you can't cut out that penny and make the pile smaller. And then the owners of the business, the stockholders, well, that's also the American 401ks that they're going to retire on. The federal government has money in some of these investments as well. So you can't start attacking their ability to make money, because that is business, and small businesses need to make money. And every law that we pass affects everybody in the country, including small businesses. The only people that are ever exempted from from laws passed by Congress are the members of Congress. So that's my perspective on the economy.
Which, as far as I could tell,
so I mean,
100% the.
So and then the other big thing, as much as I think Donald Trump is a pig, he does point out one thing: energy costs drives everything up, and we need to get more refineries open, and we need to get more energy going, because every single item that you have, it uses fuel to mine the materials, fuel to transmit the materials to the refining facility, fuel to take it from the refiner. Not to mention, all these places are using energy to do their job as well. And then you have to transport it to the component manufacturers, and then from the component manufacturers, the final product manufacturers, the final product manufacturers to the distributors to the retailers, and then the retailers home. So ridiculously taxing fuel. That means the consumer at the end of a fuel tax, they're fuel taxed 10 times on one item. So get rid of the fuel taxes and find another way to tax, so you're not taxing single items over and over. The second part of it, bringing the fuel costs down by like unchaining what is the cleanest energy production in the world, because the energy appetite's not going to go down. It's going to keep going up. We need to keep working on alternative energies, nuclear energy, stuff like that. But until we have the electrical grid, we can't even switch to electric cars, and we don't have the resources to do electric cars. We'll never have electric cars for enough to make the batteries for electric cars for just the transportation, much less the personal vehicles. The resources we just don't have access to those resources. So you increase the fuel production in the country that does it efficiently, reduce the taxes on that fuel, and that's going to bring down the underlying costs, and then you end up opening up competition even more, and then people will be like, okay, well, I can lower the price here to get the sales away from my competitor, and then the competitor lowers their price. Now they're competing for customers instead of just trying to, stay afloat. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Unless there was some sort of paradigm shift with how we generate electricity. So it's a far-fetched idea, but there is something like zero-point energy. There's other like we're just kind of going down the same road of just keep repeating the same with every example that you just gave me, Rob, which they were all outstanding. So it doesn't really lead to any sort of solution other than just a little off the top here, take a little here, and just kind of at the same end result. So other than if we write some outstanding bills to say cut some of this federal spending, and then have someone like yourself testifying up in Congress why we need to say either cut back our military spending or doing something, because it's like you said, 1.2 trillion in every 9 months or so that we're paying just to service this debt, So it's not sustainable, and then they keep doing these CRs, just kicking the can down the road and not actually having a budget. So I would hope to be part of the
Yeah,
solution up there.
and those CRs are creating more debt every single one, and we're not paying down our debt or any of that. And then, and on the energy standpoint, we have the solution, and that's nuclear. And nuclear can be safe. It absolutely can be. And we have better technology than we had when the 3 Mile incident happened. Our technology is far better than the Chernobyl. And if you do a little research, or in addition to the test that they were running that night, there was also an earthquake that night when Chernobyl happened in an area that never gets earthquakes. So we don't know what the ability for that facility to withstand an earthquake was. You get what I'm saying? So the cleanest, most efficient, and cheapest energy production we have is nuclear waste, but we've made it almost impossible through regulatory burden to build a nuclear power plant. We could build new refineries that make even cleaner fuel, except for the fact that the regulatory burden is so high that we can't get anybody to build them. And the government shouldn't be in business, so the government shouldn't be supplementing this. The government needs to create an environment that's efficient for people to do that. And that includes extra incentives for researching alternative energy, like zero-point energy, geomagnetic energy. Like, we've got a giant magnetic sphere. We should be able to pull some energy off of that.
Right.
So solar sounds great, but there's not a single solar panel out there that gets more than 20% fuel efficiency. And then wind, there's lots of ecological damage that's done with the big wind farms. They look horrible. They make the land around it useless. And then they're ridiculous. Like, I just drove through one the other day coming back from Arizona here to Texas, and like, you can see oil spots all over on the ground. So you can't call that eco. And they all need fossil fuels to keep running, because you have to use fossil fuels to lubricate them. So, I mean, right now, we're the cleanest. Yeah. Well, and
I wish.
imagine how much cheaper our fuel would be if we didn't have to sell half of our oil across the sea because we don't have a refinery that can refine it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's craziness. But the number one thing is the budget just has to be cut. And our government, to me, was set up to protect people from other people, sometimes inside the country, some outside the country. And the government has just massively exceeded that mandate, as demonstrated by the fact that we have 5,000 agencies, and 90% of those agencies replicate what the states already have. The federal government was not supposed to be in control of everything. The states were supposed to be in control of everything, and the federal government coordinated the work between the states. Does that make sense?
Of course.
So prior to the Civil War, we were even referred to in the plural because each state was considered like an autonomous country. So if you look at writing before the Civil War, it was the United States are, and now it's the United States is. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but we need to remember that the whole foundation of our country was set up to run on independent states taking care of their people, and the federal government facilitating cooperation so we can have these diverse states and diverse terrains making one unified country. Does that make sense?
Of course.
So, but that doesn't mean the government has to spend all the money to do everything. I think private industry does everything better. I challenge anybody I interview to name one thing that the federal government does well, other than spend money.
Good question. Name one thing. Yeah, so we entertain us for sure. So we give us a lot to talk about. So that's one good thing. It's entertaining for sure.
Yeah,
we are talking about it.
So I mean, so that's like, if you get into Congress, I hope you immediately start diving into the numbers, because when you start looking at the things that the federal government spends money on, it would blow your freaking mind. I've spent hours going through these bills. I've spent hours going through the financial statements. Like, even here in the state of Texas, I'm sitting here going, why did the state of Texas pay $9 billion to an aircraft manufacturing company?
Why?
I don't know. I couldn't find an explanation why they were paying it to it, but you can find it in the accounting. And they were like the 4th largest recipient of money from the state of Texas.
Wow.
I don't know.
There's some
All right,
backdoor
so
deals. But I do,
huh?
well, what I did hear about, well, one good news that I did hear is that Texas is going to tie into the national grid. So like our ice storms and where we completely have no power in Texas. I think that hopefully that'll be a thing of the past. That's what I heard. That I don't know if it was the Texas Energy Commission or some sort of deal with the federal government, but Texas will in fact be tied into Louisiana, I believe Oklahoma, Arizona, some of the neighboring power grids, so that if and when these disastrous things happen here, hurricanes, ice storms, whatever it was or is, that'll be a thing of the past where we're completely down. Our ERCOT grid won't be completely shut down anymore. So that's one bit of good news that I did hear about our power situation here in Texas. That like little tin cans and strings that seems like it's holding this thing together.
Well, what happened? But see, that's not going to help us in Texas. We have some of the cheapest energy in the country, so we're going to connect to the rest of the country and let them buy our energy out from under us in the hopes that if we have an emergency, we have it. Well, how about we just fix the problems that we have here in Texas, which is the winterization of our power plants and the reliance on stuff like wind and solar power that doesn't work in the winter. That's what caused the power outages.
Right.
The plants aren't winterized, and there was a directive to winterize, and none of the energy producers winterized the plants. So they adjusted. Yeah. But we shouldn't have to worry about it anyways, because global warming's coming, so it's going to be so warm we shouldn't see another icy winter in Texas, right?
Yeah, climate change. It's a stinging bee, and it can hit us both ways. So we're extremely cold, extremely hot.
So climate change is one thing that I don't really bother discussing, and the reason I don't bother discussing it is because every single decade since the 1960s, the Democrats have been talking about some impending disaster of the climate. It was the impending ice age, acid rain, ozone layer, global warming. Well, then the temperatures didn't really beat what they said was going to happen with global warming, so then they make it more abstract and call it climate change. And then they make, the storms are going to be more powerful and whatever. This hurricane season's been the least active hurricane season in 20 years. Now, there's been some horrific tragedies, but the deaths from natural disasters are actually down, not up. The damage numbers are up because everything costs more to rebuild now.
Thanks to the National Weather Service, Project 2025, they wants to do away with that. But that's not how I know I'm running for Congress. It's not running for president. But thank you. That was a spirited conversation.
Right. Well, I mean, but you've got it. But you've got to vote in, vote out, right?
That's right. And actually be productive up there, which is what I'd like to do. I want to work on the committees and work in a spirited bipartisan fashion to work for the betterment of our country.
Yeah. Well, the most disappointing thing for me being here in Texas is I look at the records, where my house was. I was getting ready to move, so I didn't bother. I almost ran for the House of Representatives because in my old district, the person representing me had been in Congress for 6 years and never produced a single bill. So you're just going there to yes sir for somebody else? Yeah, that's not what I call representation.
Not at all.
So let's now, coming off of the economy, another thing that's really stressing the economy would be healthcare. So what's your solution in healthcare? I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, and I hope you don't.
Okay, well, so healthcare costs going up, is that what you mean? How do we,
yeah.
Is that what the question is? How do we get better healthcare? Or
yeah, exactly. Because when I lost the insurance that I had, in private enterprise, I lost the insurance I had when the Affordable Care Act came out. I was offered new plans that were worse, and then now that I'm no longer working in these fields, it's absolutely impossible to be able to afford the insurance plans. So, what's the solution? I don't qualify for any government assistance on it. So what's the solution? What's the solution to get the cost down?
So to get the cost down, man, Tough questions, but great questions. They're thought-provoking questions, Rob. Well, let me give you, like, not deflecting, but let me say if and when I'm the representative here in U.S. House Texas District 2, well, my office would be a working office, so I would just invite people to come to my office. Let's really look at your situation. Like, I think it probably just goes on a case-by-case basis, so I would really just invite you to the office. Like, we can really just see what seems to be, like, your concern with not being able to get either affordable health insurance through the markets, because there's other companies besides I'm familiar with, like there's Cigna companies that you can buy health provided through your employer. Like so if you're not fortunate enough, like work for a company that's offering and then offering to pay some of it. I know that the costs are skyrocketing. There's no secret. There's no secret behind that, and probably a similar sort of dynamic, which I'm sure there's underlying costs that of course the companies have, but there must be somebody getting very rich off of the few. So we really need to look closely, like you said, looking at crunching who's getting what is the most to gain from like these cost price gouging or just the prices of these going up. And then when it comes to just simple like helping, so that would be the federal government stepping in like with appropriations back home. Like so if you need help, come to the office. If you qualify, we'll help. Kind of like an employer would, like cover some of your costs because each year our district gets about $50 million a year. And I noticed Dan Crenshaw, it's always to the same company or companies, like it's infrastructure, which we need, but a lot of the other representatives, what I've noticed as I studied them in around Houston area, that they appropriate it for different projects. So one of those projects could be like, I call it a Have a Heart initiative, Rob, so that you would come in, if you qualify, like your income's either too high or too low for a current situation, like you're not getting insurance, or if it's too low, you just need a little help, like whatever it is. So I would be there to like help with, they cover your cost each month of your insurance just by using little appropriations to help. So those are my thoughts. But what are your thoughts?
Okay. Well, that's cool that you asked. So, do you know what the number one biggest single expenditure for hospitals and doctors is?
Condoms? I don't know.
Malpractice insurance.
Okay.
Because if a doctor makes an honest mistake of a millimeter, they can get sued for $20 million. So, right. Number one thing that needs to happen is tort reform. So here's the problem getting tort reform in Congress. 90% of those guys are lawyers, and when they leave Congress, they want to be able to continue to do their field. So they're not going to limit their own earning potential by limiting lawsuits to realistic numbers. Although I think it should be 100% feasible due to the fact that using the civil system to do ungodly punishments is no different than if the government was levying ungodly punishments. Like this Alex Jones sorry, I almost said it. This jerk, Alex Jones. Okay. Should he be punished? Maybe. Yep. But he was exercising free speech. Nobody forced those people to watch his show. Any of their claims that they got death threats and stuff, he didn't tell anybody to go attack these people. He's not responsible for idiots' behavior. So like when, did I lose you? So like, when Bernie Sanders was calling for action, nobody said he was actually responsible when somebody went to the event and shot a candidate or a senator, right? That wasn't his fault. You know what I mean? So unless you're calling for something to happen, you're not responsible for it. Yet this guy, through civil torts, his company's going to be sold off. He's not going to have anything. Now, should he have been hit with a libel charge? Probably, since he's presenting himself as media. But destroying somebody's life when he didn't destroy their life, it's kind of unrealistic, especially when we have a criminal justice system where murderers go to jail for 6 years and get out. Rapists mentally destroy kids, molesting them, and they get out. And yet they're trying to like destroy people using civil processes. So tort reform would fix a lot of that across the board in a lot of areas of society, but specifically in the medical field. The second part of that is if you understand the dynamics of a free market, there's two things that determine the prices: supply and demand. If something's in short supply, but there's a lot of demand, the price is going to go up. Okay, so why is it that we have, 300 companies, 400 companies that provide health insurance in this country, but only a few of the biggest ones operate in more than one state, and even there they have to set up separate companies because they're not able to operate across the country and provide a big market? Then you've got all these guys making huger pools so they can average out the expenses of the people that are sick. And if they're able to get the price down and average out the risks of covering people that are ill, then you're going to get more people that are younger. Then it's an expense that's worthwhile to them, so they have it just in case. You know what I mean? Because with our current system, part of the reason that the prices are so far up is younger, healthier people are leaving the system and they're not participating because it's too expensive for something they're never using. You get what I'm saying? And the idea of setting
100%.
aside funds, the idea of setting aside funds to implement stuff. Well, when we were talking about the economy, we already, discussed the fact that we can't afford to keep spending money on stuff. And then, like, it goes back to that question: what does the federal government ever do well? Nothing. And probably the best example is the VA, which is our single-payer healthcare system that we have in this country specifically for our veterans. But you can talk to any veteran and find out that there's no health care involved in the VA.
Wow. It's alarming for sure.
So I mean, that would be the first thing I would attack, is opening up the market so states aren't restricted, or so companies aren't restricted state by state. They obviously have to know what the regulations are, but they shouldn't be blocked from competing across states. They shouldn't have to set up duplicate companies and duplicate a structure across every state. But the idea of just pumping more federal money into it, every time you add more money, shooting at the same amount of supply, well, you're actually going to create more demand, because now more people are going to have that government money, so now they can afford it, so they're going to be placing more demand. But we didn't increase the supply, so the price is just going to keep going up, which is kind of what happened with the ACA. Does that make sense?
Right. Makes a lot of sense, and I love your vision on the tort reform, so I would stick to that. And maybe counterproductive to the, like you said, the lawyers, but I'm sure that would resonate because they're not all lawyers. They're not all lawyers up in D.C. So, tort reform, like I think you quoted $20 million for that's the malpractice, or that's how much they typically get to in a malpractice, like a 1 centimeter. I think was your example that you gave. So they need the doctors need to be to have this insurance for the I would call it more like a litigious society. Like, we're just suing too much. So that's
exactly
part of the reason.
And people treat the civil courts like a lottery, and that's it actually affects a lot of society, like all the way across. Like, it affects hiring, it affects opening no businesses, it affects even trying it, and then regulation as well. Like, a lot of these hospitals aren't able to see as much patients because under the Affordable Care Act, in order to keep compliance so they can even get funds from the federally funded programs, they have so much paperwork to do. They're spending 90% of their time on paperwork and 10% of the time on healthcare. Maybe we could provide more service and lower the average cost if we actually had our healthcare providers providing healthcare instead of filling out paperwork.
Wow. So that's enlightening for sure. So all these little things make a big difference. So I would certainly, do my part to just bring attention to these things. Like, we have this voice. I call it, I said the voice of reason. So a lot of this, bringing it to the public spotlight, and then people start calling their congressman. People start getting more involved, and I think that's where we rise. Like John F. Kennedy, we shrink the numbers, rising tides. It's like a private conversation. That's when it really when it really gets brought to the attention of the American people, that's where like the like I think a lot of the change will come, the strength in numbers.
Yep. And that's why, like, I've actually interviewed a lot of candidates because I think the dichotomy of the Republican Democrat needs to be broken because it's what prevents new ideas from coming in. But after Ross Perot arguably impacted an election, both parties did everything they could to make sure it didn't happen again, and that's filtered down all the way to the local level where it's really hard to get third-party candidates. And then if you get elected to office as a Democrat, then you'll be attacked and excoriated if you don't follow the agenda that the leadership sets. So it's hard to get new solutions in there. And the solution for everybody sitting in Congress is let's spend more money, let's implement more programs, but of course exempt ourselves. Like, you know, insider trading's against the law, but nobody seems to notice all these people that have inside information nobody else has are trading stocks. They can't claim that they don't have previous knowledge because by nature of their job they do.
That's right. That's right. So it's, you know, for sure, we need a solution, like someone, you know, like myself, to just be a voice of reason and just to do my best to try to, you know, it's insanity. We're doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, but there at some point has to be a breaking point, and you know.
Yeah, and the reality is what. Yeah, the reality is what we're doing at this point isn't doing the same thing over and over again. We're doing the same thing bigger and bigger, and we're not expecting a bigger like blow up in our face, even though we're doing the same thing bigger. So, now kind of off to the side of healthcare. I think with your party more than my party would be the abortion thing. So what's your stance as far as abortion policy and what the law should be in the United States?
Well, that's a great question, Rob. That's a tough question, and it's a very personal question. You know, when me as a man and I interject and I you know I try to like say, well, I know everything. I'm a man, and I think that's kind of like with the mentality of what I'm noticing of, like, say, the current Republican Party and the Supreme Court, that they just decided, we'll throw it back to the states because it's too much, like the overturning of Roe, which was this was the law of the land, and this was like a freedom for women. So, but I don't think it gives much women, like the current state of the abortion policy. It doesn't, it's not really considering them. So to me, like when I hear sometimes Republicans say, well, the Democrats don't love the country, and then I could turn it back on them. Well, I don't, you know, that maybe like they're not, you know, the Democrats aren't, you know, like hugging the flag or whatever. I don't know what you mean by we don't love our country, but I would flip it back and just say, I don't really see how you really love women, or you don't love Mother Earth. Like you don't have an empathy for, like the environment would be like you don't really love Mother Earth, like your daughter, like if she had a victim of a rape by a relative. Like, you know, you would kind of force her, like two wrongs don't make a right. So like you're forcing her to carry this child. Like that's our abortion ban in Texas. Like it's been all over any like debate, Colin Allred, and there's, you know, they can rattle off the names of women who have, you know, they've bled out in the parking lot of different things. I don't think that was really that's not like the best interest of our country. So where do I stand? Peter Phil, the voice of reason. It's a horrible thing, like to think, you know, a fetus is growing in a child. You want to think that's a child. It's a living. It's something we should honor and respect. But we also have to respect the woman. The woman is actually carrying that child. Like this is her decision if she wants to carry it to term. It could just be a personal. She doesn't see like the marriage is working out, and she doesn't want to like be stuck with the child. Like she's a working woman, but that's a personal decision. She should be allowed to make that choice. Or, you know, it could be like this is a Down syndrome baby. They don't want to carry it because it's going to have not a like exceptional life. So so there should be, I think it should be legal up to say 3 months. Like, you know, just go back to what we currently have, Roe versus Wade, and we have, you know, Planned Parenthood. So we have. Okay, that's my answer for you, Bob.
Yeah. Okay. No, I understand, and like, and I can under the 3 months I can understand the viewpoint on. So my viewpoint is actually the same as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and that's what most of the mainstream Democrats won't talk about. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the Democrat idol for women's rights, said that Roe versus Wade was bad case law and it would eventually be overturned if Congress didn't change anything. Okay. And it was bad case law because it presupposed a right to privacy that doesn't exist anywhere in the Constitution. It took authority over a subject that the Constitution did not grant the federal government. And that's what the overturning of it stated. There was no support for the case law used to create a law. So what it really was legislation created by the bench. Now, prior to that, the laws were based on the states. So who's creating the laws in the states? The representatives of the people of those states elected. So if you don't like the abortion law in your state, you can elect representatives to your state house and state senate that will write abortion law you like, if that's what's important to you. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
So, and then there's a lot of like misinformation around it too. The reality is, and of course the there's no mandatory reporting, even though all the information would be anonymous. But the data that has been collected suggests that the instances that are brought up by like rape and incest like that, and health of the mother, well, those are all exempted in pretty much every state. I think Texas is a little bit stricter, but life of the mother is definitely covered. But rape and incest is one of those things that are kind of not really provable, and people can just use that excuse. And as soon as you say rape and incest is excusable, then you're going to have a lot more rapes and incest. You get what I'm saying? But based on the statistics under Roe v. Wade, that was like 0.1%, which means 99.9% are abortions for birth control. And the reason I have a problem with that is because where the whole birth control and abortion thing came from was from Margaret Sanger, who was a eugenicist, who did not want black and brown people having babies. And the fact that 99% of abortion clinics are in black and brown neighborhoods, that on its face is disgusting. We have 40 million black people in this country. If it hadn't been for Roe v. Wade, we would have 70 million black people in this country. So the eugenicists got what they wanted, all under the guise of freedom of choice. They got a lot less black people. So like in the name of freedom, we allowed black women to kill black babies. And that to me, since that was the purpose of it, I don't care what else you do with it. Nobody argues for anything that Hitler argued for because it was Hitler. You know what I mean? And this woman was worse than Hitler. She wanted to wipe out anybody who wasn't white. And that's the effect. Yes, white people are having abortions too, but not anywhere near the numbers of black and brown people. And then the argument is, well, it's so they can do better. Well, do you have kids?
Yes, I have my son. Thank God, my son Joel. He's 29. I do have.
And no matter what you do or how you plan, it's always a struggle having kids.
Right, it wasn't easy.
Yeah, but you find a way. Okay, so
right.
What we have in this country is you can't criticize abortion policy or abortion clinics, but nobody says boo about family planning clinics being firebombed when they're giving people options that don't require an abortion. So again, resorting to violence to get your point tells me your argument's invalid. You get what I'm saying? So now personally, I would say, because I am also a pastor, I would say that, the Bible says, I knew you before you were in the womb. So if you're religious, that means it's a baby. And across the religions, all religions say that's a baby from conception. So the 20% of people that are non-religious, they're going to win out. That doesn't make sense to me. But if we're going to break it down state by state and the states can allow what they can allow, okay, great. But stuff like goes on in Minnesota with failed abortions being born and they leave the baby to die when there's 3 million people waiting to adopt babies in this country is monstrous. It's inhumane. It's disgusting. And it's as bad as everything that the Nazis did. So I think the state should be allowed. I think there should be a limiting factor. But because it's a limiting factor, they say, oh, it's an abortion ban. Texas doesn't have an abortion ban. Texas passed a law that allows abortion up to the time that your baby has a heartbeat. They passed a law allowing abortion, not banning it. You get what I'm saying?
Which is how long was it?
Heartbeat. If there's a detectable heartbeat, they can't perform an abortion.
Okay.
So, and then I'll throw in there when people sit there and make the argument of pro-choice, you might have had more of an argument 60 years ago. Now we have 15 different forms of birth control, and we have the morning after pill, and everybody has a choice to not have sex. So that's 17 decisions that they made. If they got 17 decisions wrong, are we sure this is the person we want to make a decision about whether or not a baby lives?
Right.
Because they've kind of already proven a bad ability to make decisions.
Yep. And so that's their last safety net. But if it was a safety net that was there for years, I don't know. But it is it's a very tough call. And where would I stand if I was up there and they said codified Roe versus Wade? I would vote yes to that, because just for a couple of examples that I know from personal experience, that it's not really it's trying to separate as much as we can men from making decisions for women, and also separating out the church versus state. I'm in agreement with the church, like a lot of the things God like is president, but we still have to have we have to have exceptions. Like we have to be like I said, I'm calling myself the voice of reason, so just from a reasonable perspective, like
as far as allowing abortion because you get to 24 weeks and your kid's Down syndrome. My soon-to-be stepson here, he's 32. He's severely autistic, almost nonverbal. Like, probably lower functioning than Down syndrome. The boy is a gem and a gift, and he had every right to life. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
So will he ever be able to support himself? Absolutely not. But a 3-year-old can't support themselves either. We don't let the mothers kill them because they're inconvenient. So now, even if you make the argument for Roe v. Wade and the trimester system, no Democrat has ever proposed that. Every proposal regarding abortion in the United States has been for abortion until birth. And the laws passed in California since the overturning in California and in Minnesota and other places like that are abortion up to birth. And Walls went far enough to sign allowing the baby to die on the table instead of saving them. And if the mother doesn't want them, okay, then let's find somebody to adopt them. And there's plenty of people that want to adopt. Again, 1 million babies aborted every year, but 3 million parents waiting for a baby to adopt. So it's a tough one. Now, I'm not going to. I gave my perspective. I'm not going to tell you your perspective is wrong. That's just my perspective on it. Is that again, the federal government's already amorphous. It's not in the Constitution that it's something that the government should be involved in, which means it goes to the state. It literally says anything not covered in the Constitution is the purview of the states, so the states decide. So that means I'm horrified by the things that happen in California and Wisconsin. I hope the people in California and Wisconsin at some point decide that's horrifying, but they've decided. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
But here in Texas, the representatives that we elected decided we're going to limit it at a heartbeat. Okay, that's what we decided. And if people in Texas want it to be extended beyond that, they can elect state legislatures that will do that. Does that make sense? It doesn't need, but the federal government doesn't need to tell people in Wyoming that you have to allow the same things that they allow in California. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I see your point about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You're making great points. I'm just thinking about what was currently law and just the few exceptions I was thinking about. And
but that's the thing; it was never law. It was a magically created thing out of the atmosphere And if you want to say, oh, well, it was the law of the land. Well, Dred Scott was the law of the land too. But those Supreme Court cases got overturned because they were wrong. And it took, 50 years for Dred Scott to be overturned. It took like 40 years for the laws supporting, to get rid of the Jim Crow laws and stuff is unconstitutional. You get what I'm saying? The fact that something's the law of the land does not mean it should be the law of the land, especially if it's based on flawed precedent. And the overturning of Roe v. Wade didn't ban abortion. It meant the states decide. So the people living in a place decide what their abortion right is in their place. And why does somebody in California have the right to tell me, which is Kamala Harris, why does somebody in California have a right to tell Texas how they should do things? When the federal government, when the Constitution says the federal government doesn't have that right.
Great
So
question.
and even Donald Trump has said he would not sign an abortion ban. So he's not for banning abortion either. He thinks there should be reasonable limitations, and the states can decide those limitations. And yes, it's going to be different. Well, if you're going to be out having sex and you want free access to abortion, maybe you should go move to a state that has free access to abortion instead of living in a state where you know it's limited. Just like if you want to smoke pot, don't be upset if you get arrested for smoking pot in a state when it's illegal, when there's states where it's legal.
Right on. 100%.
Or elect people that's going to make it legal. You get what I'm saying?
Right. These things need to be voted on and put to the public like it has been. It's been,
yeah. When you start enforcing the federal government onto the states, when different parts of the country have different values, it's a guaranteed way of fracturing the country. Because at some point you're going to cross the line and you're going to get states that just aren't going to take it again. And who knows how another civil war would end up. But if you keep doing it, that's what's going to happen, because that's what actually caused the first Civil War. It wasn't specifically about slavery. It was about the states' rights and the federal government overextending what the Constitution allowed. And they ended up having to go back after the Civil War and amend the Constitution in order to fix it. But they should have done that first, which takes 2/3 of the country to agree to pass anything, not 50 senators and the vice president. You get what I'm saying?
I do.
So the Constitution says you can't do it, so you'd have to have a constitutional amendment on it. Or to me, it legally can't be done, and any law after that would still be struck down under the reasoning under Dobbs that threw out Roe v. Wade. You get what I'm saying?
I do. So.
Because the reasoning behind it is it's not constitutionally sound. So, let's see here. Got about 7 minutes. Hopefully he'll be back. I hope he didn't completely bail. So let's get one more. Gun violence. So I'm going to preface this because I don't want it to come out like an aha. Okay.
Okay.
So there's a problem with the gun debate in this country, and it all centers on gun control. Going into this, I'm going to preface it with the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is unique among the amendments. It doesn't spell out a right. It implies a right already exists, and the focus of it is on limiting the government. So, have you actually read the Second Amendment? Because I'm always shocked at the people that haven't.
I was just reading. I was reading it, Rob, and just a little preamble, whatever the first lines, and I know it's to sort of paraphrase it because I can't remember word for word, but I do paraphrase it. It's basically it's a right for right for us to organize so that we're not overthrown by a government. Like, I can't think of the words, but it's
but that's not what it is.
Okay.
So I read very specifically into it because it had a very specific intention. Okay. So a regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Okay. That doesn't grant a right. It says the people have the right, and the government can't restrict it. That's what it
It shall
says.
not be in.
There's
That
no
was the
limiting
interpretation.
factor. There's no,
Mhm.
but okay. So, and that's the thing. Why are you putting interpretation in? Why did they make the Second Amendment? They made the Second Amendment because they had just finished overthrowing a tyrannical government. What did they what did they consider a militia? Well, the United States didn't have until like what, 1850? The United States didn't have a standing army. We had a militia. What was a militia? Who fought the Revolutionary War? Citizens with their own firearms, their own cannons, their own dynamite went and served as militia to fight for our independence. So that's what they considered a regulated militia. Everybody had to have guns so we can come in and tell you what to do so we can fight. Okay? So their idea was everybody should have guns, and back then everybody did. Everybody had guns. There was no American in 1776 that didn't have a gun. Everyone had guns. Okay? So and this states it as though it's obvious the right of the people shall not be infringed. It doesn't say we're granting a right, and some of the amendments are worded as though they're granting a right. This one is not. It just states the rights exist and the government can do nothing with it. Okay? So that's my first point on it. So my second point is there's 400 million guns in this country. But we don't have 400 million shootings a year. So the problem isn't the guns. As a matter of fact, the assault weapons, which don't exist, assault rifles, it's actually, I'll get to that in a second. More people are killed with hammers than all rifles of all kinds, even with the mass shootings. We're not trying to ban hammers. 10 times more people are killed by cars than by guns. We're not trying to ban cars. What do? We require people that have a car to be responsible. You can't buy a gun without a background check. The only place you can is if I sell you a gun, there's not a background check there. But if I sold it to you and you're not legally allowed, I'm in trouble. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
So, like, if you're a felon that's not allowed to have a gun, which, again, we get back to the right shall not be infringed thing, and that becomes a problem. But as the laws exist, you know, even that, if I don't have you do a background check before you sell that gun, I'm taking a liability onto myself, which is why most people that do private gun sales, they go and do them at gun shows and sell them to the dealers, but all the dealers there do background checks on every customer. You get what I'm saying? Because if you have a TFL, you have to background everybody that sells, or everybody that you sell to. So then we drive down on, like, the biggest point on guns, the fact that the majority of the gun deaths are in cities where guns are banned. And in all the other states, all of the mass shootings happen in places where guns are banned. Schools, churches, places where it's already not allowed to bring your gun. You follow what I'm saying? So apparently passing a law making something more illegal doesn't stop the illegal act. And the majority of the mass shooters are not in possession of a gun that they legally obtained anyway, which means passing another law restricting guns isn't going to keep them from getting a gun. Even in England, where they've had a complete ban, you go to the criminal neighborhoods, everybody's got a gun. And their amount of mass killings didn't go down. They actually went up. People are just using machetes and knives and clubs to do the killings instead, if you follow what I'm saying. So, now, all that being said, I understand your position is probably going to be a little bit different. But with that being the Constitution, what realistically can we do to stop gun violence? And that's why I don't phrase it as a gun control question, because gun control is unconstitutional and gun violence is an issue primarily in cities that Democrats already control. So what do we do?
It's a great question, and I thank you for prefacing it by giving me the facts. And these are true facts. I'm not going to deny any of the things you say because I'm sure there's a lot of these are all true facts. So the question was, realistically, what can Peter Pillow, the voice of reason, when I make it up to Congress and I become the next representative for U.S. House Texas District 2, what can I do to realistically stop violence? Well, so there's history. So if we know history repeats itself and these things are likely to occur again, so we really have to think about enforcing or reinforcing some, stability in these institutions where these incidents are taking place, and we need to have more, I would say, counseling. So we need to figure out like there needs to be a better system to like do a dragnet and to really sweep these areas of the kid, or for example, whoever's the perpetrator. So we know here's the perpetrator, here's their profile. This is what's happened. We know this is likely to occur again. So how do we nip that in the bud? How do we get a dragnet out there to cover all those things? So if it's realistically stop gun violence, I would say it's more proactive, like us as I'm an educator. I didn't mention that, Rob, but I educate children every day. I'm a ninth grade English teacher, so I've been educating for about 9 years now. So I know there's signs like there's kids they just whatever like there's so I would have a better system to dragnet to like talk to these kids, just like uh, sensitize them, because I think a lot of the problems, Rob, is like it's desensitized from everything from like just us kids we're growing up watching like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, like that desensitized us. Like now it's more like they're there with a Grand Theft Auto or whatever game that they're playing that's desensitizing them. So like we need to maybe have more, institute some warnings like this is a game. If you do this, like, real people will get hurt. So like I would like focus on putting it back onto us as a society to like let people know like there's real consequences for actions, and then as much as we can, like if it takes the FBI or like the local police or whatever, like to be more proactive with trying to prevent, like so if we know this person potentially could be have these kind of plans that are just the parents, like it could be with the parents as well, like having like if you see something, say something, like more to try to stop it, and then if it does happen, that's going to be more like it's sad to say, like our school needs to have more police, or our churches just more. This is just the reality we're living in, since we can't do much to infringe upon our rights to own guns, so then we have to have more security, if that makes sense what I said. I'm curious to know your response to any point that I made. What are your thoughts?
I think it's a tough one. I was actually discussing with a candidate for the Texas Board of Education the fact that we need to stop having counselors serve as administrative clerks when we already have administrative clerks that can be working on schedules and stuff with kids.
Right.
Our counselors in the schools need to be healthcare professionals. I think the fact that like 7 of the 8 most recent mass shootings were people that identified as trans or non-binary, not trying to vilify that, but I think our argument of something that was 5 minutes ago a mental illness, and now we pretend it's not a mental illness, and now these people are losing control and doing these horrible things. They happened before that, but they were still mostly mentally ill people. Whether it happened under bullying, whether it happened because they're having gender dysphoria, whatever it is, this is clearly happening because of a mental health issue. We pay people to be counselors in the schools, but we don't give them the time to be able to actually interact with the kids. And it's not the kids that come out to seek them out to talk to them that they need to talk to. They need to go and talk to the kids, the loners that are off to the side. They might be like me, who are just focused on studying and doing stuff because I had to get everything done at school because I grew up on a farm, and when I got home, I had work to do. So I was always a loner in school because I had to get my work done. But there are kids out there that are loners in schools because they're being demolished by everybody around them, if that follows.
Yeah.
So I think that the mental health aspect is the issue, because you used to have kids that would like have their guns in the trucks when they went to school because they were going hunting after school, and there weren't school shootings. So what's changed? How we treat mental illness, and a rapid increase of mental illness. So maybe those are the things that we should be looking for to reduce gun violence. And then, of course, in the urban centers, um, there's a correlationary uh, um, statistic on crime and environment, and there's only one statistic that is very consistent, and that's two-parent families. And then if you go and look at what all these places where the most of the gun violence happens, well, first you have to like point out that 60% of the gun violence is people committing gun violence on themselves. If you follow, I'm not going to say the S word because it gets kicked off of social media. You know what I mean? So that so then that's obviously the same issue. It's going to be mental health, and then two parents, like two-parent families, like you're like 10 times more likely if you come from a single-parent family to end up dropping out of high school or ending up in prison. Like 10 times more likely, and yet we don't support. And it's funny. I'm on the more conservative side of libertarian, but I completely blame Ronald Reagan for this. The no-fault divorce. Marriage is hard. If you've been married, it's hard. But making it easier to get out of stuff because it's hard doesn't help, and it does horrible things for the kids. If that makes sense. So we have to look like what's really changed in the last 50 years is all this has gotten more and more common is there's less and less dads in houses. And it really comes down to the dads. So we need to incentivize dads to be fathers. But then again, like I don't know, it's tough. You're going to tell moms if they don't want a baby, they can kill a baby, but you're going to tell dads if you don't want a baby, you're stuck with that baby. So they can't even abandon a baby. So I mean, it's completely crazy. Wouldn't the better solution be to just incentivize families so there's two-parent families? Then we don't have to abort the babies. We can raise them, and then they have two parents talking to them, so they have a stable life, and they know how to communicate. Because they've shown that if you have one parent, no matter how much you talk to the baby, by the time the kid's 2 years old, they've heard 10,000 more words if there's two parents. You know what I mean? So it's it's crazy. So I think that's the biggest thing. We need to change the culture, and we also have to change the idea that it's just okay to let criminals keep walking around, because crime is like drug use. It always escalates. Now, you can point to rare exceptions where it doesn't, but the recidivism rate is over 70%. And then once they've committed violent crime, the likelihood of them advancing to murder is 60%. So, we need to really look at what's going on in the society and how we've handled these issues into it going in.
So without a plan to fail, and I'll just leave it at that, Rob. 100%. So thank you for sharing all that. I'm in agreement with 99% of what you said there, Robin. Thank you for sharing your insight. What I'll leave it at is, without a plan, we're planning to fail. And I would love to work on the education, all those made reference to, because it's coming at us from all angles, this problem with our culture. So we really need to change the culture. And if we start at base level, our education system, and if we had a way to get more counseling, make it maybe harder to, I don't know, it's kind of hard to child-proof or proof everything, to insulate us so that we won't harm ourselves or our society. But, maybe if you want to get married, say, maybe you have to take a little course in relationships and what are the keys to long-lasting relationships. So if we had more long-lasting, healthy relationships, we'd have the ability, you're mentioning, to really talk to kids and maybe it's more my point, sensitize them to child, this is a video game here. This is not reality. Or I like your point too about the changing of our culture, and if something's a red flag that we're noticing, we notice something that's not right, we would call it not it's something that just sticks out like a sore thumb that we can notice. Thumbs up with this child, So our counselors need to be, like you said, they need to be healthcare professionals and really able to pivot and to talk to them and really see, what seems to be troubling them, and but they don't resort to violence just because, or whatever. Like have more of an acceptance of these other students, so they don't feel like they're targeted, so they don't feel like they need to lash out. So that's what I'd focus on if I could possibly work on the education committee, like making sure teachers are maybe they need training to our each individual teacher, because there's only so many counselors in a school that could be like viables, but teachers maybe should have to take some have some certification in healthcare so that they can also help with identifying these red flags as we're seeing it, just to try to proof us, like insulate us from some of the madness, so that it's just try to have a sane culture as much as possible, considering our times we're living in.
Yep. So and yeah, I mean it's and so my biggest thing, like, I mean, I'm primarily trying to get like different voices out there. That's the point of doing my interview series all the way into the election. I do hope that I mean, I wish you the best of luck. I already told you how I feel about Dan Crenshaw. Like my specific problem with him is the fact that to me it seems like he turns his back on veterans a lot, and as a veteran, that's just disgusting to me. So, and like he's a member of Congress. He doesn't have a right to disrespect anybody who's a constituent, whether he agrees with them or disagrees with them. And the guy just comes across arrogant, like he's better than everything. Well, hey, God bless you, man, that you serve. Thank you for your service. That doesn't give you a right to like dehumanize and minimize people that you disagree with. And the fact that I haven't seen him doing anything to get these people that are being like thrown in jail for rightly like questioning what's the decisions being made. It's disturbing to me, if that makes sense. So those are my two main reasons. My dad was a veteran. My stepdad was a veteran. My brother joined the military. My grandpa was a veteran. Like, long history of military service in my family, and to see a veteran just kind of, to me, like have the appearance of turning their backs on veterans is beyond me. To kind of wrap this up, I hope after the election, whether you're in office or not, I hope you can come back, because the conversation's good, and it's always nice when people don't just like hammer on about their ideas without like taking time to listen and like. This is what I do now. Like my primary role is taking care of my stepson, and I do other stuff to bring in some money to help out the household. But that's my primary role right now, is taking care of him. So it gives me a little bit more time to read and research, and so I have a lot of facts, and just a lot of what happens doesn't make any sense to me. And like I pointed out with Kamala, she's like, "Oh, prices are too high." Well, people need to stop raising the prices. Well, if they stop raising the prices, they go out of business. So it's my first presidential election, I voted for Al Gore. Somewhere between there and September 11th happened. That's what it was. After September 11th, I realized the things the Democrats say sound great. And on an emotional level, you want to get on board with them. And the end goal that they talk about a lot of time is right. Like the end goal with abortion, allow women the freedom to have careers and all that. That's all great. But then when you start looking at the route that they take to get there, a lot of time it's very questionable. And then they use emotional blackmail if you push back against their plan. And so that's why it's great that you're able to have these conversations. So, like, I mean, I hope that after the election, whether you're in office or not, that you'll take the time to come back and visit with me and talk. I really do hope so. I mean, because it would be great. I think you're a great person to talk to, and I'll even give you any perspective on mine on any legislation you're planning to propose or vote on, because I have the time to develop a more nuanced approach to a lot of stuff. And when they're trying to shove 500-page bill down your throat and say you have 24 hours to decide, can kind of help with that. You know what I mean?
Of course, that'd be greatly appreciated. And if and when I make it, you know, I'll be sure to call you for like, come up to testify on some of these bills. It's open for the
And
public, and I'm sure
and
you enjoy that.
and as an educator too as well, I would still like to talk to you about that, because I mean, we got issues in our education system. Like, ever since the Department of Education was created, our education quality's gone downhill. So I've got issues there too. And since that's specifically, what you're doing, and I'd also like to talk about the environmental sciences and some of the misleading information out there as far as environmental statistics. I'd love to talk about that. Shoot, depending on how far into it, like I even understand all the way into nanofabrication, string theory. I can talk about anything. So,
Thank you
just great.
about Crenshaw too, because I noticed the same. Like he dehumanizes. Like I noticed now he's taking pride in something he calls eviscerating, where he'll be in an interview, and as soon as something goes wrong, he'll just start insulting in people's intelligence, and he takes pride in that. So yeah, he doesn't represent me. I'm sure he doesn't represent you, Rob. Like the majority of the people who are reasonable folks in our district. So I'm hoping that message will resonate. Like a school teacher, an educator, reasonable Democrat. I'm not. I'm moderate. Like I'm not extreme. I don't think, and I see myself as like someone who's going to fight the powers that be and not just be like a rubber stamp for Democrats. I'm going to speak up. Like if these Nancy Pelosi, I need some time to read this healthcare bill. Like I'm not a machine. I can't read this, and like how they pass. Like you'll know what's in it after you pass it. Like that doesn't pass the test for me, like a smell test. So I mean, at least that would be like someone speaking out against it, like that. Like
Yeah, in your personal life, you would never sign a legal document without reading it. So why would you sign a legal document that you haven't read that impacts 350 million Americans? It's insane. So, again, thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully, I can get my the guy who popped in there at the beginning of ours. I think we had the time issue here. He was actually the Solidarity Party candidate for president. So I hope I can get him back. But
well, for me, on the and it's been a pleasure chatting with you, Rob, and your audience. And I look forward to again like future conversations. And I'm always constantly like I'll never I know it all. So I learned a lot from our conversation.
Yep. And if you get to Congress, keep having the conversations, because no matter how the narrative goes, I guarantee you, like even Dan Crenshaw, I just don't agree with his way on one thing that's like a red line for me. But I don't think he's a bad guy, and I don't think anybody on the right is a bad guy. I don't think anybody on the left is a bad guy. But we used to have conversations between the sides that help find solutions. But now everybody's like, no, we're going to do what I want. No, we're going to do what I want. And you never meet in the middle and find the solutions, because everybody wants to take credit for coming up with the bill. But the bill does no good if it doesn't have a solution. And bad bills are the biggest thing that goes wrong,
That's right. 100%. So it needs to be compromised, win-wins, and not a my way or the highway type of policy. That's what I noticed about him. He's a my way or the highway type of person, and that's not who we are as a congressional district. People like Rob, we have conversations, we work things out, we get win-wins. So that's what I want to do. I want to be the man with a plan who's going to unseat Dan. And so if you want a true leader, vote for Peter, and I'll leave you with that. And again, it's been a pleasure.
Because this idea, if you're not on my team, you got to go down, is ridiculous, and it's got to stop. If it doesn't get fixed, the country will fracture again, just like it did under the Civil War. But instead, what you're going to see is an East Coast and part of the East Coast and pretty much the entire West Coast, and then maybe a couple states in the middle are now part of the new communist states of America. Because if you separate those states out, the communists will take control, no problem. And then you guys lose the middle of America, and good luck finding food. So,
Oh man.
but I mean that's where it goes if we can't get people to stop vilifying the other side and just listening to each other's perspectives, because then we can probably find solutions in the middle somewhere.
That's right. Let's
So
go.
thanks again for joining me. I do wish you the best of luck on your race, and make no mistake, if you win your race, like 5 minutes after they call your race, there will be an interview request in your mailbox. So I hope you respond.
That sounds like a plan. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'm gonna flip over. Thanks so much for joining me again. That was the U.S. House candidate for Texas District 2, Democrat Peter Filler. So thanks. I think he said his tagline is "Vote for Peter for a leader."
Yep. If you want your leader, vote for her. The
There
man
you
with the
go.
plan is and
Works for me. All right. You have a good night, man. And thanks again for joining us here on OTR RVL.
a pleasure. Good night.
All right, guys. So, I was supposed to be interviewing right now the solidarity candidate for president of the United States. Um, he hasn't responded. This is two presidential candidates now. The first one could never get on, and this one, I thought I mentioned that I was in Texas and that it was Central Time, but I don't know what's going on. Let's see, let's make sure that the follow up came. Okay, I'm gonna follow up with this guy. I'm gonna put his back on hold. Hopefully, I'll be able to get him back on here so we can have the interview. If not, our next interview will be at 8:30 with Jeff Miller, and Jeff is. Let's see here. He is a candidate for. Where is it? He is for the Congress 10th congressional district. So, and he's the Libertarian candidate. So, as a Libertarian, I'm definitely looking forward to talking to him. And like, I don't know if you guys noticed from the Libertarians I spoke to before, they kind of go either direction on a lot of issues. But they're not, number one guiding, their guiding light and everything that they decide as far as policy is liberty. So, all right. Well, thank you guys again for hanging out. Again, if I'm not able to chase down this other interview, then we'll be back. Looks like about 35 minutes. So go. If I don't come right back with Mr. Sonski, then go ahead and grab a drink, grab a restroom, and we will be back with Jeff Miller. All right, welcome back, revelers. I hope you guys enjoyed that last interview. Unfortunately, we had a little misunderstanding about the time zone for my interview with Peter Sonski. He was on the East Coast time zone, and I was scheduling for Central. But we just ran a little bit long with Jeff Miller, the congressional candidate, and now we do have another congressional candidate that we're going to be talking to. And of course, again, I'm a libertarian, so I'm super excited to be able to talk to this candidate. It's Jeff Miller. He's the libertarian candidate for the U.S. House District Number 10. So we're going to go ahead and bring him on now, and I'll let him introduce himself. All right, and Jeff, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you clear as a bell. That's wonderful.
Great.
So, yeah, it doesn't look like it's displaying your camera. You should have next to your down at the bottom of your screen. Are you using a phone or are you using a computer to call in?
No, it's a laptop.
Okay, so
Yeah,
you
on the
should
bottom it
actually have a.
says the camera's on, but it's I don't know where. I guess I can look in the settings and see if there's something in there.
Yeah, because in the settings there should be a video tab and it'll have you select your camera.
Yeah.
Oh, you were there for a second? Oh.
Am I? Can you see me?
Well, it came on and then it went back off.
Huh, that's weird.
It like did a quick flip.
Okay, let me try this.
Your laptop's fighting you.
Anything yet? Well, it's weird because I just got this laptop last month, and the first thing I did with it was an interview with the Austin American Statesman editorial board, and it was through Microsoft Teams, and the camera worked fine. And
That is
then
so strange.
the next thing I tried to do it on Zoom, and the camera also didn't work on there. So it may be somewhere in the computer settings, but I don't know what it is. But anyway, I don't want to
Well,
waste your time trying to do this while we're talking, but
yeah,
it depends on how
no.
important it is for me to be on camera, I guess.
Yeah, it's no problem. I mean, it'd be great if the people can see who I'm interviewing, but it's fine. I got you up here. They can see that it's Jeff Miller, and then I have this little doodad here prepared for you. Oh, where is it? Okay. So, anyway, so to get started, since libertarians are kind of off the beaten path, I like to have them describe what a libertarian is to you.
Oh gosh, start with the tough question. I
It's
would
the most
say on a
it's the most basic to me though, because
yeah.
like we've got to break. Our system was never set to be a two-party system, and the two main parties have done everything they can to make sure that it stays a two-party system. But a lot of people just don't have any awareness. Like even one of the guys that does the podcast with me, like he cannot stop conflating liberal with libertarian. He doesn't get liberty out of it. He gets liberal. So
Well,
like,
and liberal is
and,
another word that gets, used to mean a bunch of different things, because
yeah,
it's been distorted from its original meaning also.
yeah, because
Because
Democrats aren't really liberal anymore,
right,
and
I like to sometimes call myself a true liberal in the sense that I'm actually for free speech and free enterprise and freedom of movement and freedom across the board, which I guess is a good answer to your other question. I can paraphrase our vice presidential nominee, Mike Termott, who basically said that the libertarians are the philosophical descendants of the founding fathers. So the whole revolution was fought over not having somebody from a long way away dictating how people in a local community live their lives. And we fought the revolution and we won. And so everybody gets to have their own life, right? Well, then slowly over time, we started building up our own version of the same tyranny we were originally fighting against. And we've gotten closer and closer to what we were against when the revolution was fought. So I think the libertarians are the ones that are kind of there to say, hey, wait a minute, we're going in the wrong direction. You have two parties that are both different flavors of big government. So we're the only party that's actually saying we want less government for real. Like the Republicans used to say that. Now they've pretty much even given up saying that themselves, because everybody knows that's not what they stand for anymore. So
Yeah, I mean, they just
both
well, you just got two different people
interest.
two different people trying to tell you their way of controlling your life, which is like
Yeah.
complete contradiction of what the whole entire system was supposed to
And
be.
as far as, congressmen, they used to go back to their district and at least say, well, here's my list of things that I accomplished. Even if that list was just, naming an airport after somebody or something like that, they at least had something that they were saying, this is what I did. Now they don't even bother to do that. They go back to the district and say, well, the other party is scary. Here's all the reasons that they're terrible. You have to reelect me. Otherwise, somebody from that party gets in and everything goes to hell. That's basically their message. So it's all
Exactly.
about making you afraid of the other party, not actually saying, I've been doing a good job representing you.
Yeah, exactly. And that was actually kind of a point that I made when I was talking. I was talking with Jeff Miller, who's a congressional candidate for District 6, taking on Dan Crenshaw, and that was like kind of something that like I really appreciated with him. He's running as a Democrat, but he was really open to having conversations, so that was like wonderful. So
Hmm.
and that's like I was talking with him, that's what's missing from politics now, is that discourse. We're like A versus B, and there's no discourse, and we've got everybody locked into these two parties, but there's other options out there. I was trying to interview the solidarity candidate for president as well, and I tried to interview one of the independent candidates also, and that's the whole reason why, because we do have more than two options, and until we can break people's idea that there's only two options, we're not going to improve anything, because now they're just like in a race to like outspend and outcontrol the other.
Hmm.
So, anyways, as far as election, we are hoping that you get into a congressional district here. So, um, we're gonna have to go over like the stuff that Americans are feeling stressed about right now and what they feel is important. And then I'm gonna start with the economy because it's the biggest thing, and then I'm actually gonna touch some topics that I didn't really talk about with some of the other people, just because I haven't covered them, and I'd like to have an independent or a libertarian viewpoint on them as well.
Sure.
So the first one is obviously the economy, and before I ask you the question on it, I like to preface my scenario, because I think nobody really understands how bad our economy is right now because of the inflation. So the first thing they do is they pick and choose what they're going to count in the count, so they get a lower number. So even though they say the official number is like 4% or 6%, like the inflation is actually like 20%, 30%, like that. So I do a simple math exercise. If you sell $100 million worth of cars for $20,000 each, it's 5,000 cars. Okay. So now if you have inflation and those cars are now 24,000, that's only 4,100 cars. So you're now building, selling, shipping, financing 900 less cars, and a lot of people lose their jobs. So when they say the GDP goes up by 2%, but the real inflation number is like 10%, as far as the goods produced and the people employed, we're actually 8% in the negative. So I bring this up because pretty much ever since Joe and Kamala exploded the inflation, we've been in a recession that's been completely hidden by the inflation. So I preface that because I hope that's in your calculations. But our economy is completely out of control. So as a libertarian, what kind of legislation would you propose uh, to fix the inflation and national debt and all of that?
Well, I mean, it really boils down to just stopping the reckless spending. And that's, one of those easier said than done things because every year in every Congress, they spend more and more and they justify it by saying, well, if we don't do that, then all of these things don't get funded. And then the government shuts down, and then all these people are out of work, or all these, and the economy gets worse. So they always do it like it's a constant emergency situation where you always have to pass the big omnibus spending bill, or else everything will fall apart. But of course, what we've seen in the times that we did have a so-called government shutdown, and it's never a full government shutdown, it's always partial, uh, is that most of those doom and gloom scenarios don't actually happen. But the politicians have to keep that scam going in order to justify spending your money on the things they want to, their pet projects and their districts. And really, the biggest pet project is just reelecting themselves. So that's what they're mostly focused on. So again, it's all political posturing to get themselves ready for the next reelection campaign, where they can say, well, I passed I made sure that roads and bridges and school lunches, and they just rattle off the list, are funded because I voted yes on this giant spending bill. And that's the reality, is that most people living their lives, just working their jobs, and normally they read the newspaper or read online or whatever they look at, watch the news, and they say, oh, this bill passed, and they don't really know all the stuff that's in it, because even the people who voted on it don't know everything's in it, because it's impossible to read it all.
Yep.
So that's the way our Congress has been operating. I'm glad that we have at least somebody like Thomas Massey in Kentucky, who will use his time in a committee meeting, in a committee hearing, to basically chastise his fellow Congress people on continuing to do that charade over and over again every year in terms of the budget. Um, so really, as a new member of the House, if I were elected, there's a couple of things. One, if obviously, I hope it's a libertarian sweep and we elect a bunch of libertarians. If that actually happened, even if we had a small handful, we would have a lot of leverage, especially in this environment where we had just a small handful of people deciding who was going to be the speaker. Basically, they held up that process for a
Hmm.
long time. And if we had even a handful of Libertarian Party people, we would actually have a lot of leverage when it came to things like the rules of the House themselves, and the way committee assignments happened, and the way some of those budget things got going in the first place. But if it was just me, if I was solo, I would have to make a decision on how much of a pain I really wanted to be, because one member of Congress actually has a lot of power, more so than people think, because they have the ability to object to anything that actually happens in the House. Uh, and obviously, the House can vote down objections, but it takes a long time. People don't like going through that whole process. I remember a couple years ago when there was another one of these big bills that was going through, where one member objected to waiving the reading of the bill.
Hmm.
Because normally everybody just goes along with that. Everybody accepts it. Okay, we're not going to read the whole bill in front of Congress. But in that particular instance, it was objected to. And so the clerks had to read the entire bill, and it took 8 hours just to read the bill. So that's an example of the sort of thing that one person can do if they're trying to make an impact. And so my position, and I would seek the counsel of people who know a lot more than I do about the process, and kind of come to the conclusion about when picking my battles, where I wanted to really try to be a nuisance, and where I'm willing to be a little more of a team player. And obviously, it would depend on a lot of those initial conversations with the leadership in the Democrats and Republicans, and where we stood as far as who had the majority and by how much. And so there'd be a lot of interesting conversations taking place if I was in that position.
So, and can I offer a couple suggestions
Of
for
course.
legislation you might propose? First and foremost, anybody who votes for a bill that spends more revenue or more money than we're going to be taking in revenue is ineligible for reelection.
That's a good one.
Pretty
I,
sure we
I
get our budget in line pretty quick that way.
yeah, I think that I would probably, because they always come up with these cute names they give everything to make it seem like it does something it really doesn't.
Oh,
But
that's the more
I think,
legislation I was going to mention.
yeah, I think that I would propose something like the restoring the freedoms that you already should have, and pu- Puppies Are Cute Act or something of 2025, put it something like that, where, it's like, how dare you vote against this? Freedom is
Oh
good
yeah,
act, something like.
like the quote unquote bipartisan border bill, which actually all it did was codify 8 million illegal aliens over 4 years, more border guards processing fake asylum claims, more judges that would rubber stamp, because judges that they appoint would just rubber stamp their policies.
Yeah,
Uh,
like the
and
so-called
then,
bill to legalize marijuana, which
yeah,
also created new federal crimes and new taxes.
exactly.
So, and that's another thing I mentioned. Thomas Massey, he proposed an amendment that would have stripped everything out of that bill except for basically there's no federal marijuana crimes, and anyone who has a record of it, it's expunged, and that's it. And of course, that amendment failed because people didn't want to vote on that up or down. But that's
Exactly.
something I obviously would have supported that amendment.
Yep. So and then like even on the legalization of marijuana, a lot of places where they got it like push was they pushed it by saying, "Oh, this is going to be a great way for African Americans to lift up their families," and then they go and like make the regulation and expense to get into the industry so expensive that it didn't open the market to anybody. You
Oh
just
yeah,
got
and
rich
that's
people are the only ones getting into the market.
that's a very common lie that especially the Democrats have liked to tell because they try to keep that interest group of the black vote in favor of Democrats, and meanwhile their actual policies have done more to hurt the same people that they claim to support.
Yeah.
And
So,
the
so
latest was that they
yeah,
tried to do the menthol cigarette ban. Once again, it's like this ridiculous thing where people think banning things is a way to somehow improve the behavior of certain people or get them to behave a certain way that you want them to manipulate them into doing that. And what is true over and over again is if there is demand for a product, people will find a way to get it. And when you make it illegal, all you do is make it more dangerous and create more of a culture of violence around whatever that thing is. And you know there
I
was a
don't
time.
I don't think you can go all the way down that path, because then that's like making an argument for fentanyl that's going to be deadly no matter what. Or like crack cocaine, the addiction is so strong they're going to commit crime to get their drugs.
Well,
You
but
know what
there's
I mean?
even in the case of harder drugs, we can shift the society, the way we're looking at it to punishing people who are addicted to drugs versus getting them help. And now we have a situation where there's people who don't get help and people who don't help other people because they're afraid of getting arrested and thrown in prison for something. And
Right.
we have to get away from that kind of culture.
Yeah, but I will point out the entire decriminalization of all drugs cannot work. We have the perfect case example in uh, Oregon and Portland. They tried that, and we see exactly what happens. But I think it's because we don't. What we're really lacking is civic responsibility and personal responsibility in the country. Like as
Yeah,
a whole, as a society, we've lost it.
when I'm
And like,
talking to
yeah,
non-libertarian audiences, I tend to blow somebody's mind when I say this, but the purpose of government is not to solve everyone's problems. The purpose of government is to protect individual rights. And that's part of the problem is we have such this attitude in society of, oh, there's a thing that somebody is doing I don't like, then let's sick the government on, let's sick the cops on, let's, I need to ban the thing because this is a bad thing. There are so many ways to work together as a community to solve problems, and it happens all the time, every day. But people tend to forget about that because it's easier to kind of say, well, so there's authority figures we can cede the power to, and they're the ones responsible for this, and I can go on about my life and like you said, not take the responsibility for those things. And it's not an easy thing to change because it's been building up that way for decades. And, ever since the Great Depression and some of the things that came out of that, things that were supposed to be temporary things to help people became permanent dependency. And uh, over the
like
years,
employment tax was supposed to be temporary, and here we are 100 years
yeah,
later; it's still in effect.
politicians figured out that it was a lot easier to push things off on the next people and to say, well, we tried and they stopped us from doing da 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 da, and that kind of stuff, instead of actually working hard to change things. When the people that really tried to say, well, there's sacrifice involved, when you do spending cuts and things like that, those people would lose elections. And so the campaign consultants say, well, you don't want to do that. If you want to get elected again, don't do those things because people don't like that. So if you go by the polls and you govern that way, trying to tell people what they want to hear, then you're always going to keep adding to everything. But there will be a breaking point at some point, and I know people have been saying that for a long time, but the truth is that as society evolves and progresses and we get more and more currency being more electronic and all that sort of thing. Those kind of sci-fi movies about whoever controls the electronic stuff being in charge, they're becoming closer to reality.
Yeah,
You have,
especially with the terrifying prospect of central bank digital currencies.
yeah, and so a lot of those concepts that people came up with are not too far off from the direction that we're heading. And for people that had that attitude of, well, I'll just let the people who know better than me take care of things, the more the people have that attitude and don't really look into what's going on, then the easier it is for that to be accomplished. So I don't know, if that economic breaking point will happen in my lifetime, but if it is, we certainly had moments of getting close when you think about the inflation that you talked about earlier and just how much prices went up in such a short time. Um, that had a huge effect in terms of people's habits, in terms of how many people continued to actually go out to work versus working at home. People buying products at their local mom and pop shop versus buying on Amazon. There was a lot of things. There was a big wealth transfer again from small businesses to big businesses, which is always what ends up happening when the government gets involved. Is you have these things where the local people are the ones that suffer. Chase Oliver, our presidential candidate, likes to tell the story of the friend he has that worked in her own flower shop, but when COVID restrictions happened, they said she had to close down, and she ended up going out of business. But they didn't tell Home Depot they had to close down, and now she works in the flower shop of Home Depot. So that's the way things happen when you have that type of interference. Is that the big corporations and those that are basically protected by the government, they're going to survive. Meanwhile, the small businesses are the ones that suffer.
Right. Well, and then when you're like talking about you mentioned the inflation rate, and I called out how it's fake. I also want to throw in there that the unemployment rate is fake too,
Yeah.
because all it counts is people that are receiving unemployment or filing for unemployment. But if you've been unemployed for over a year, you don't qualify for that. So what you really have to look at is the labor force participation rate, which is like going all the way back to 1991. We're a full 10 points behind where we were in 1991. Uh, it's at 51% now. And like we were actually headed in the right direction. Going in 2020, it was down to 49% that weren't participating in the market. Now it's going back up to 51%. But it was higher earlier when you had like two parent families and not everybody that could have a job did have a job. But now we've made it to where like two people have to have a job, but we don't have the people employed. So we're just kind of pretending that those people that either haven't been in the job market yet, so they don't qualify for unemployment, or people that have been unemployed for so long that they don't qualify for unemployment, they're completely unaccounted for.
Yeah, it doesn't count the people who just don't want to get a job, who mooch off other people, and uh, it all. Then we have, of course, the people that have multiple jobs that are part time because we had something like Obamacare that said, well, the businesses have to offer health insurance to somebody working over 30 hours a week. Well, a lot of places just cut people down to under 30 hours, so then they got to get a second job working less than 30 hours a week. So it doesn't, take those things into account either.
Right. So the other suggestions that I would be saying by law is no law may have more than one item in it, and no law may be longer than a page. And the reason for that is simple. Any bill that a normal person can't understand violates the Equal Protection Clause.
Yeah, I think there was a similar proposal that was again, it may have been Thomas Massey that actually proposed it, but I forgot exactly what he called it. But it was something very simple, like Read the Bills Act or something. And I think part of what that covered was that very thing. Like, and there's another name I'm going blank on that has I've seen proposed. It's basically the along the lines of what you said, where it's like the bill can only have one purpose. You can't start stacking things onto the bill. But
Yeah,
I look,
if I were in Congress, my goal would be to clean up the federal laws,
yeah,
because we expect people to follow the law, um, but the only people that are able to really follow the law, and they still run afoul of the law, and that's people with accountants and lawyers.
right.
And not everybody can afford that. We know people can't afford it, so it's a violation of the Equal Protections Clause. Um, Now I've got another violation of the Equal Protections Clause. As we move into the next topic, it's just a good transition point, and that would be gun control and gun violence. Um, to me, the NFA is a violation not only of the Second Amendment but also of the Equal Protections Clause. It's been said that because people can still buy fully automatic machine guns, they just have to register with the ATF and pay the tax stamp. But then because they block manufacturing, it's now priced out of everybody who's not rich because most people can't afford. I would show you my wonderful like piece that always sits beside me. But YouTube just changed the laws that on a live stream you can't do that. You can do it in a recorded video, but not a live stream. Um, so like I have a HMR, which is kind of an AR style rifle. Um, but I can't get that fully machine gun. If I want a full machine gun, I'm going to have to pay 40,000. But the manufacturer could easily make this a fully automatic machine gun and still be a less than $1,000 gun. But we've now made it so the law doesn't protect the people that carry it. The one other thing that I do want to do before we start talking about the gun control is read the actual verbiage of the Second Amendment, because I think it's different than all the other bills of rights, all the other amendments, all the other places that it spells out rights in the Constitution. And it's and I'm gonna afterwards I'm gonna insert a couple points of context. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The 2 points that I like to make on this are well-regulated militia. All that meant was everybody should have guns, so if they need to fight, they can call them up, because we did not have a standing army at the time. And the fact that we have a standing army now does not change the fact that every person should be able to fight, because if a country of 1 billion people like China decide to invade us, we're going to need every man, woman, and child, or well, not child, but every man and woman that can carry a gun to be on the battlefield. And we're not going to have the guns as the government's not going to have the guns to provide that. So we do need our civilian population to be well regulated, and it's primarily meant to fight a tyrannical government. The second part of that, this does not grant a right. It states the right exists, and it doesn't limit the people, it limits the government. The government should not be infringing on it. So that's where the NFA violates the Second Amendment, but they say it doesn't because anybody can do it if they get the money. But the reality is not everybody's going to be able to get the money. And by taking away the supply, they made it to where a gun that should cost $1,000 costs $40,000 because you can only buy a gun that was manufactured before 1979. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the gun laws are really a joke because they've been based on, again, what I was saying earlier. It's about the posturing and the imaging. So when it comes to the laws that are about specific types of guns, it's basically, well, this kind is scarier looking, therefore that's not allowed, but this less scary looking one is, because that's the compromise. And that's the way they go after it, because generally the people that are making that legislation don't understand the difference between them anyway.
yep.
And you have a case like Dexter Taylor, who was assembling guns in his own home and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for that. Uh, and that's the kind of thing that you hope will make it to the Supreme Court. But meanwhile, you have somebody in prison for exercising their right. So
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem. Is we have a lot of cases where people go, oh, guns go boom, scary, people die bad, and they don't go much beyond that. And they don't think about those things that you just talked about in terms of what the purpose of the Second Amendment really was and what's behind that. When you see all the images of governments being tyrannical towards their people, and people go, oh, yeah, that's bad. And this is what was put in place by our founding fathers to prevent that from happening in America. And then some of the same people that, will stand up and say, Black Lives Matter and all those slogans,
and
which
burn
are
down cities.
good. Yeah, but then they will say, I'm in favor of all these laws that keep taking guns away from people that could protect themselves from the very people that are doing violence to them.
Yeah,
So
it especially bothers me with Black Lives Matter because the number one cause of gun death for Black people is gun violence by Black people in Black communities in Democrat cities where guns are illegal. But then you go and look at the statistics, and like at least 100,000 times a year, people, whether that's a little old lady at home by herself or out on the street, somebody being accosted, 100,000 times a year, people use a gun to defend themselves. And sometimes, and some of those, if they end up shooting the person, it gets included in the gun violence statistics, along with self harm. I can't use the other S word because you know how YouTube is. Um, but there's a lot of gun violence that gets stopped because anybody who's used a gun knows how hard it is to shoot under stress and while moving. So even if the other person has a gun, they're more likely to run away than they are to try and continue to rob you or whatever. And this is like taken completely out of there. But again, that wasn't the intention of the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was to protect ourselves from a tyrannical government.
yeah, some of the same politicians that will support the gun bans are the same ones that talk about how in favor of women's rights they are. And I like to say that I'm in favor of women having the right to protect themselves in whatever way they deem necessary.
Exactly. A gun is the ultimate equalizer. A woman, no matter how fit, strong, or well trained she is no match for a 250-pound solid muscled man. But if she has a gun, she does.
Yep.
So, but as far as the gun violence, to me, I think the bigger issue is societal problems, and I actually have one specific thing that I mean, President Reagan's kind of my hero, but I think he's responsible in a lot of ways for the current shape of our society because the no fault divorce create a ton of single parent families, and 70% of the criminals come from a single parent family. Well, specifically a single mother household, because a single father household has almost the exact same statistics as a two parent household. So it's absent fathers that are the issue.
Yeah, I'm a single father myself, so I know what that's like. And I people are in a lot of different circumstances, and I think the best thing that elected officials can do is simply to get the government out of the way of letting people live their lives and have what they need for their families in the way that they can do that. So that
Yeah,
would be my
absolutely.
number one thing was is you can't legislate people into better behavior, but you can create a better environment that doesn't prevent them from making some of the better choices. And if people still make bad choices, and they still have to deal with the consequences, but you
Exactly.
allow people to have the freedom to make those choices in the first place.
Right. And then when it comes to gun laws, I make the point that they do absolutely nothing because in all the cities where gun violence is a problem, when they arrest people for gun crimes, they don't prosecute them.
Yeah, it's another what I talked about earlier. It's political posturing. You have to make yourself look a certain way, so people say, "Well, we've got to do something about these shootings," because people say, "Well, you have to do something." So they say, "Well, in that case, we'll pass a law that says something like you know, these guns bad act of whatever year," and they pat themselves on the back like they've done something. And uh, the reality is that it doesn't have that effect. People will always find a way around it. Most of the shootings that have taken place are situations where the guns were obtained There was one recently where it was the father gave it to him. So these laws about like raising the age wouldn't have had any effect on that, because if as long as the father was past that age, he's still going to purchase the gun and give it to him. So there's things like that that just, again, they're for politicians to make themselves feel better or try to make themselves look better to their constituents, and not about really solving problems.
Right. Well, and then do you know the story of the Ludi gun?
No, what's that?
Okay, so I'm gonna pull up this picture. I'm not holding it, so it won't be a violation. So Facebook censors, I'm not violating anything. So let me pull this up here. Give it a second to load here. So this is a Ludi gun. So what that is a fully automatic 9mm. Essentially looks kind of like an Uzi. So after England did their 100% gun ban, a guy named Ludi went and made his own out of stuff that you can get at any hardware store. No matter what you do, criminals are always going to get guns. And when you talk about mass shootings, I don't recall any of them having legally possessed guns. They were either stolen, accessed illegally, or bought illegally. But what the one thing that is consistent is mental problems, because no matter how you're feeling, it's crazy to want to kill a bunch of people. So the focus needs to be taken off of an inanimate object, because there's 400 million guns. If guns just went off and killed people, there'd be no people and there'd be all guns. So it's the people killing people. So we need to address the mental health aspect and not the gun aspect. And then a lot of people don't understand, to buy a gun, no matter what, you have to go through a background check. The only exception is, like, if I sell you my gun, you wouldn't have to do the background check. But if you happen to have a criminal background and then you go and do something, I'm responsible for selling you that gun. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I saw your message. That's fine. So yeah, so to me it's pointless. Like, criminals are always going to have guns. In England, where they've banned guns, you go through the bad neighborhoods, everybody still has a gun. Like, nothing's changed. And they didn't get less mass killings. Now they just do them with knives, machetes, and clubs. And like, the trying to ban assault rifles, like, I can rip that apart on its face, because AR stands for Armalite rifle. The AK-47 style rifle, AK, stands for Alexander Kalashnikov, the guy who wrote or invented that rifle. So it doesn't have anything to do with assault at all. All there is rifles that are easier to use and control for people that might have a smaller frame, or like me, I have issues with my thumb, so I wouldn't be able to hold a standard rifle over the barrel. I need that pistol grip, or I'm not going to be able to stabilize the gun to take a shot.
Yeah, whatever they choose to ban as far as the equipment, there will always be someone who makes just enough adjustments to make it so that it doesn't qualify as part of that.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the fact that, like, if they banned all guns, you can still make guns by going to a hardware store. What are they going to outlaw hardware stores next? And then the fact that more people die by hammers and clubs in the United
Yeah, I
States
mean,
than
there was
die by all rifles.
not that many years ago, there was a serial killer in Canada that was using a knife and killed quite a few people without having a gun.
Yep. Well, and like, I just point out hammers. I don't see, like, they want to ban assault rifles, but more people are killed by what they call assault rifles, or more people are killed by hammers than by rifles. So tells me that, again, it's not a weapon problem.
Yeah.
It's an illness problem. So I know you got to go here, so pretty soon. So we only got one more topic. So I really haven't talked much about foreign policy. So you can pick Israel, Gaza, or Ukraine. You can pick one.
Well, First of all, I'll say I like that you got straight into the issues. It's been interesting with these interviews what people choose to want to talk about because I've had several things where I spend most of the time just telling my life story, not really getting into all of that at all. Other times I talked mostly about the Libertarian Party and the legal issues we had and the ballot access fees and that kind of stuff. And you went straight to the legislation and all that kind of stuff. So
Well,
it's been
the
great to have like different people things that people focus on. It kind of
the
helps me.
reason the reason for that is I don't think your personal life is relevant to whether or not you should hold office. I think how you think the government should govern is what's relevant.
Yeah, no, I
So
understand.
I want to know your position on the policies and the issues.
It's
And
it's just
yeah,
interesting to me the different things people focus on. But yeah, I it won't take me too long because I have a very simple, but again, it blows some people's minds when I say this kind of policy when it comes to all of that is that I believe in what, George Washington said about foreign entanglements. Basically, if you start picking sides in overseas wars, it becomes a permanent thing where you become responsible as a nation for the welfare of people in other nations. And you
hmm
justify that by saying, well, we're a superpower and all those sort of things. But it never ends. I mean, we've had conflicts we've been involved in and have taken the resources of the people here and given them to foreign governments and their militaries for longer than I've been alive, and
yeah,
it never stops.
we propped up Saddam Hussein again during the Iran War, and then
Yep.
we ended up fighting against the military weaponry that we paid for
Yeah, we
a
spent
decade
billions of
later.
dollars uh and 20 years and lots of lives lost to replace the Taliban with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Uh,
Yep.
I believe that individuals should be able to contribute either monetarily or if they want to go fight for someone in another country, they should be allowed to do that. I believe people should be free to put themselves in whatever conflict they want to and to whatever degree they want to. But I don't think the people of America should have their money taken away from them and given to overseas wars. So I believe all of those should stop as far as the American involvement, and that would be my driving principle in Congress would be to support the ending of American involvement in all of it.
Yeah, and our involvement with Ukraine, like helping convince them to give up their nuclear weapons, is the whole reason why the war started. Our involvement with trying to push them into NATO is what triggered Vladimir Putin uh, to attack Ukraine. Ukraine
Yeah, a lot of
was
people
part.
falsely say isolationist, but it's not. Non-interventionism is different than isolationism. In
Yeah,
today's world, you can't be isolationist and have any kind of, thriving economy of any kind. You'd have to be a pretty small place. But that's what it
but
is.
with the situation with Ukraine, I put it this way: it's not entirely delineated, but it is somewhat. Actually, a good example is Cuba. We used to control Cuba. Cuba became independent, and then as soon as Russia started arming them, we blockaded them and put sanctions on them that lasted for what 60 years. So we can kind of understand Russia's position on this because we took the same position on Cuba. And if Puerto Rico suddenly decided to sign a defensive pact with China, we're going to have an issue with that. And yet, that's exactly what we were trying to do with Georgia and Ukraine. And
Yeah,
like,
I support people's rights.
what's Georgia to Russia? Stalin was Georgian.
I support
What?
people's rights to do business with whoever they want. So I don't support
Yeah,
the, sanctions that basically end up hurting the very people that we claim to be allied with and hurt our own people more than they do hurt the governments that we or militaries that we try to fight.
yeah, and the sanctions on Russia. You know what the biggest impact was of the sanctions on Russia after they annexed Crimea? Because I was there for 2 years. You know what the biggest impact was? Belarus had to buy cheese from Italy, repackage it as Belarusian cheese, and sell it to the Russia or to Russia that way, so they can get foreign cheese. That's what
Yeah.
happened. Like so,
Yeah.
like
Well, I guess that
all
gives
the
me
sanctions are a joke.
a real quick opportunity to say I would support repealing the Jones Act And that's actually one issue that I disagree with Thomas Massey on, because he said that he supports keeping it, but it's the shorthand version of that is it makes shipping things much more difficult because of a lot of restrictions in the way that things are shipped, like
Hmm.
literally by ship, in the ports that they can do business with. So that's an example of one of those things that's been a federal law for way too long that has caused much more problems.
Yeah, which brings up, the greatest question: why is stuff sent by ship called cargo and stuff sent by car called shipments? No, anyway,
Why do we park in a driveway and drive on a parkway?
yeah. So, my viewpoint on it is we have a weapons manufacturing industry. They should be allowed to sell the weapons to whatever nation wants the weapons to defend themselves, as long as they're not directly engaged in harming their own people. We don't have a right to have an opinion over how other people defend themselves. If Ukraine wants to buy our weapons, we can sell them weapons. Um, that's independent companies and free of the government. The government shouldn't be signing these contracts. You know what I mean? But we
Yeah,
shouldn't be. We
that's
should.
the little known fact, is that whenever people talk about government doing something, is almost always government is hiring private companies anyway to do the actual work. So it's kind of like the
Exactly.
movie Office Space, where they say, "What is it you actually do here?" You know,
Yeah.
because the
Well,
government doesn't do the work; it hires people privately to do it anyway.
but then they can do what Nikki Haley did and get out and get paid by these defense contractors like millions of dollars as a consultant.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other kettle of fish. Look up how
Yeah.
many people that have worked for the FDA have come from the companies that are trying to get things approved by the FDA.
Oh, and how many people with the FDA are getting paid residuals on patents for drugs that they approved?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all a mess. My viewpoint for both. So like Ukraine, the minute Putin started running his mouth, Obama should have just said, "Look, if you're interested in the historical perspective, we'll listen to your viewpoint right after you agree to give the entirety of Eastern Russia back to Mongolia, and you agree to give Western Europe, Western Russia, back to Ukraine, because that was all the Kiev and Rus, because there was no such thing as Russian people. So if you're not going to do that, then stop your stuff about uh, uh, the historical perspective, and let's sit down and have a real conversation about what your concerns are, because the historical perspective doesn't work."
Right, they haven't even attempted to take back Alaska, so
Well, they at least sold that.
yeah.
So, but the reality is, until they went in and conquered it again, like there was 1,000 years that Russia did not control Ukraine, because it was part of the Polish Empire, it was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was part of all these different empires, and it wasn't part of the Russian Empire. So like there's a whole lot of history that he just kind of leaves out there. But if he had just done that, okay, your arguments are ridiculous about the historical perspective, but let's sit down and talk about what your real issue is. And what his real issue was: NATO, which was formed to fight Russia in the event that they needed to, moving closer to Russia's borders. We're not going to be okay with that either. And it was a reasonable concern. And Putin was always clear from the bottom line: this is a red line. You don't go here. And he did. Now, there are arguments to taking Crimea because it was all Russian speaking. Well, then you got to throw in the fact that the only reason it's Russian speaking is because they forcibly moved all the Crimean Tartars from Crimea to Izhevsk and used them as slave labor in the Kalishnikov factory in Izhevsk in Udmurtia. And then the more irony there, if you talk to anybody in Udmurtia and ask them if they're Russian, they tell you no, they're not Russian, they're Udmurtian. So, like, it's really complicated, and people don't understand how complicated it is all over the world. So if we're going to have a policy that we sell the government so they can defend their country, okay, we sell the government so they can defend their country. We don't get involved in that. Israel, if anything they want to buy, they should be able to buy. If we give them governmental loans, okay, great. We analyze the risk and we give them the loans. But we shouldn't be giving away free money to other countries when we can't fix our problems in our own country and we have a $35 trillion debt. That's my viewpoint on both Israel and Ukraine, and I think it makes it pretty clear my
Yeah.
level of support.
And to
And
bring
like,
things full circle, well, first of all, I'd say I was just talking to my son the other day about Kurdistan, which, they have their own map where they don't accept the borders of any of the countries around them. So it goes to what you were saying. But I am glad that we have our constitution, because I think it has helped to hold together the US for much longer than a lot of people predicted that we would. And it's one of those things that a lot of places in the world don't have, and they don't have that sort of foundation that really solidifies these are the rights we have, and the Supreme Court says that, rules on congressional legislation, and people actually go by it. Not that they don't keep trying to fight the things that they believe in, but they don't take up arms and attack the Capitol and things like that. So there's a lot of things I think that are good about America, even as much as I may complain that we've gone in the wrong direction when it comes to more and more power being given to centralized for the federal government. So that's why I think that it's worth it. I think America is still savable, and I think we just need to get things moving in the right direction and stop continuing to justify giving more and more power to smaller and smaller numbers of people.
Yeah, and then and I think I just want to point out, being that you're a libertarian, if you go back in history and look at, like, going back to 1824, you had Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and then you also had William Crawford and Henry Clay, and then you had um yeah, Andrew Jackson was a Democratic Republican, and so was John Quincy Adams. Uh, but then you had two other candidates that were also Democratic Republicans. So then you get to 1832, and you've got the Democratic candidate, you got the Republican candidate, and you got John Floyd, the nullifier candidate, and William Wirt, the anti-Masonic. Then you go up to 36, and then you've got the Democrats and you've got the Whigs. Uh, and then you go even further, and then you go back to Democrat, Republican, and then you got the American Party, you got the Constitution Party, you got the Southern Party. You keep going, you got straight out Democratic Party, you got the Greenback Party, the Prohibition Party, the National Equal Rights Party, the Union Labor Party. Like, all of these elections were elections between 5, 6, 7 parties. Okay, we were never intended to be a two-party state. And
Yeah.
I think the failure to break through, and both sides colluded to make it harder for independent parties because they got scared so bad by H. Ross Perot.
Yep, he's the
So,
last one that was able to successfully petition to get on the ballot in Texas, and I think as an independent, we had to fight for our ballot access here in the Libertarian Party of Texas. And in the last few years, they decided, well, the way to reduce our candidates and get them off the ballot was to make us pay the filing fees that their primary candidates pay, that is supposed to pay for the primaries, which we're not allowed by law to participate in. So that's why I'm in the position I am now, because I started out running for state representative, and then I was declared ineligible by the Secretary of State, and so was our congressional District 10 candidate. So I ran as his replacement and paid the $3,125 fee in order to just be on the ballot. And again,
yep.
that is required of people when they file to be on the primary election ballot. So basically, they have to make up their mind. Is it a primary fee or is it a general election fee? Because it can't be both. And they're operating basically like, for other parties besides the Democrats and Republicans, it's a general election fee. But for those parties, it's a primary fee. And it doesn't make any sense.
Yep. So I'm with you 100%. Um, but the biggest thing to me is, if we continue to keep it divided, like, straight down the middle, Democrat, Republican, the differences now between Democrat and Republican are are far greater than the differences between the Democrats and Republicans when the Democrats decided to secede and start a civil war.
Yeah.
So if we don't break the monopoly of the two-party system and get other ideas, well, clearly we're never going to get our budgets under control, and we're never going to get any of our freedoms back, because for all their talk, I haven't seen a single candidate for a single office anywhere get into office and then start fighting to get our rights back.
Yeah, it's sad that it's become so polarized, where the politicians and their cohorts in the media have portrayed it that way, where you have even people that won't talk to family members because they're on the wrong team, and that's sad. There's used to be, like, you could argue about politics, but then you came together and said, okay, we'll talk about that another day, let's live our lives. And now you have so many people that think that every thing in their life has to be governed by that. And if you support this politician or this party, well, then I can't talk to you. You're one of them, and that's a unhealthy uh, something to exist in society. So I think that it's sad that it's become too much that way. Like, when I got something broken on my car, I want the mechanic to fix it. I don't care if he's a Democrat or Republican or independent. That doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to fix my car, and that ought to be the attitude when it comes to just about everything.
Yeah, and
Is
then
we can argue about philosophy, but meanwhile, there's practical things that need to be solved.
yeah, and then you end up with like nasty rhetoric. It's particularly funny to me, like uh, calling Democrats communists, which some of them are socialist, some of them are Marxist. But like, if you actually look at the political cell, you start at the center, you go left, you get Democrats, then you get communist, socialist, Marxist, and then Nazis, because they were like the most extreme of the Marxist ideologies, because they started out socialists and then they went even further. The only difference between Nazism and communism was Nazism had private enterprise, but you did what the government told you, whereas communism, the government owned everything and you took what the government gave you. But you go the other way and they try and say it goes Republicans and then far right goes Nazi. No, you go to the right, you get Republican, and then you start getting a circulation of what I'm allowed to do, because you go further right than Republican and you get libertarian. If you go further right than that, what do you get? You get anarchist. You don't get more control of government, you get less.
Well,
So
I think the left right spectrum is basically, to me, it's almost useless because it's used by whoever to mean whatever they want it to mean in whatever context. And that's why I like the diagram that shows libertarians at the top instead of left or right, because like, no, we're up. We're not left or right. We're up,
yeah.
because
Well, and
we're
the
the ones that say
and
you can live your life in all areas, whether personal or economic.
yeah, and to me libertarians kind of go on the original Lockean bargain. You give up a little bit of your rights in order to have peace and security. So the government's only job is to provide peace and security, protect you from other people or from other nations, and that's it. And anything else the government's trying to do is BS.
Yeah,
It's
as
supposed to promote
voluntary
the
a society as possible is the way to go.
exactly. So, well, I thank you for giving the time. I know you've got another commitment you've got to get to. So I do appreciate you joining me after the election. If you get into office or not, I hope you join me again, because the conversation was great and there's always a lot to talk about. So I do appreciate you joining me, and maybe convince my buddy Brad that comes on here with me sometimes. Maybe convince him that, again, it's not just me. Libertarians
Yeah,
aren't
and I'll work
leftists.
on getting the camera to work for next time, because I am sorry that didn't, but yeah, I appreciate the invitation a lot, and it was a good talk.
All right, and yeah, and then I'm going to be making clips on this, and the clips do better than the actual stream. So hopefully, it helps people get your name and get them looking at you, and hopefully, they'll consider you for your house race. Because let's see, where was it? Who else is in your race? I
Well,
know I
Michael
had it.
McCall is the incumbent Republican, and then the Democrat is Teresa Boisseau.
Okay, so I had your Ballotpedia up here a little bit ago, but then I like pulled it up because I also talked to Ted Brown.
Yep.
Yeah, so I also talked to him, and then I talked to the two independent write-in candidates as well in that race. There's 5 people on that ballot, but everybody's being ignored except for Ted Cruz and
Yep. Of course.
yeah.
That's how
So
they do it.
yeah, so it's ridiculous. We do have an uphill battle, and I may actually be joining you in this battle come 2026. Because I may just go and try and run for my district that I'm in here. I almost did this
Awesome.
time, but I ended up moving, so it wouldn't have made any sense because I wouldn't have been in the district I was running for by the time the election came. So
Yeah.
so
Well, we need
anyways,
everybody we can get. I tell people, even if you don't necessarily a lot of people, when they read the libertarian platform, they find they agree with most of it anyway. But even if you don't necessarily agree with all of it, even if it's certain issues, I mean, we could use your help, and the Democrats and Republicans don't need your money. They don't need more of what they're begging you for, because they're just going to keep abusing it the way they always have. So
Yeah,
be a part of a more independent movement, however you can get that done.
yeah, and I say if you're a Democrat or a Republican on the voter level, you should be voting libertarian anyways, because the libertarians actually going to shrink the government, which is what Republican voters want,
Right.
and they're going to ensure freedoms. And on the left side, for the most part, we're going to protect the social issues that they care about, because we're the ones that are about freedom and
Right.
not the government trying to take control to grant you freedoms. Because as soon as you start letting the government grant you freedoms, you have none.
Absolutely. And if you're in my District 10 in Texas and you're one of those people who say, well, the Republicans are going to win anyway, well, then why not vote for Jeff Miller? Because, if you think it doesn't make a difference, then at least register your protest. And the more votes I get, the more people will take notice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were 83,000 Republicans that voted in the Republican primary, 20,000 that voted in the Democrat primary. But if that ends up coming down to being a race that, well, I mean, that's the reality. If you don't like what he's doing over there, and you throw your votes for Jeff, if we get 30,000 of them, Jeff wins.
Yeah, that's the reality. Is the one who gets the most votes wins. The election hasn't happened yet. We're about to start early voting on Monday, but anything can still happen. So
Yep.
instead of just accepting what they tell you, go out there and make a difference.
Yep. So if you're a Republican, he's going to vote to shrink the government. If you're a Democrat, he's going to vote for your freedoms to do whatever you want. And you should definitely be voting for Jeff. Thank you again, Jeff, for
Thank
joining
you.
me. And you have a great night.
You too.
All right, revelers. So there we go. So that is the last interview that I had scheduled for today, and it's good. It's ended up being a long day. It's already 9:30 here. I'm going to try and reschedule that interview with Peter Sonski, the Solidarity Party candidate. But I do appreciate you guys. I've seen you guys popping on and watching the interviews and whatnot, and I'm going to get some more clips so you can catch the stuff that you missed earlier on. But thanks again for joining us here at Off the Rails, Right versus Left. And you guys have a great night.